Imagine waking up as a farmer in the winter of 1709, the cold biting harder than any blade you've ever known. Your breath freezes as it leaves your lips, hanging in the air like smoke that refuses to vanish. The ground outside is iron hard, the wells sealed with ice thicker than glass, and the fields stretch silent and white as if life itself has been erased. Then, without warning, the ice beneath your boots cracks like thunder, sending a shiver through your chest. You lunge for the bank, only to see starving wolves emerge from the tree line, their eyes fixed on you in the frozen stillness. Out here, survival against all odds is not a phrase. It's the choice between life and being claimed by winter's hunger. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Alright, find that cozy spot, take a nice slow breath and just let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're stepping back into the time of the early 18th century, when the Great Frost of 1709 brought Europe to its knees. This wasn't just a harsh season, it was a disaster that crushed crops, starved livestock, and left families clinging to life with every breath. You wake to the pale light of a late October morning, the horizon barely hinting at the sun, its warmth swallowed by a chill that crawls through the fields. The village is quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest and makes every sound inside your own cabin seem too loud. Outside, the wind moves through the skeletal branches of the trees with a sharp, whispering hiss, carrying with it the scent of frost yet to come. Today, you tell yourself, is the last day you will see the crops in their golden maturity. Beyond this, the winter promises only silence. The smell of damp earth rises from the tilled fields as you pull on your boots, stiff from yesterday's work and frozen in spots from the early morning frost. Your hands are rough and cracked, nails chipped from months of digging, planting and pruning. As you step outside, the soil crunches beneath your feet in frozen clods, and a thin haze of breath curls in front of you like smoke. You can see the villagers already at work, bent low over the last stalks of wheat and barley, their movements careful and deliberate. Every handful harvested feels like a small victory against the cold that is slowly creeping toward the village. The animals in the yard, your companions through the long months of planting and tending, huddle in their pens, their breath misting in the morning air. The chickens peck at frozen ground, their tiny claws scraping futilely at what was once soft earth. The goats and cows press against the fences, their sides thin from months of lean feed, eyes wide with the instinctual knowledge that the cold is coming, that the winter of 1709 will be crueler than any before. You shiver, not entirely from the cold, but from the thought of what is to come, yet you bend again, hands full of grain, your back aching from the repeated lift and toss. You pause for a moment to look out over the fields, golden under the pale grey sky, and you realize how fragile it all seems. A few weeks from now, this beauty will vanish beneath snow so thick it will be silent and unbroken. The wind will carry no bird calls, the trees will be stripped of their leaves, and even the animals will grow quiet, conserving what little warmth they can hold. But today, the harvest is yours to claim, every bundle of wheat, a promise that, for now, survival is still in your hands. You return to the barn, stacking the last of the harvested bundles, the smell of hay mingling with the cold air. Inside, the animals watch you with faint trust, sensing the care that keeps them alive. Your hands ache, your muscles protest, but there is a small warmth in the heart at having done what can be done. Outside, the wind lifts, carrying the first hints of frost deeper into the soil, whispering of the silence to come. And as you lay your tools down and glance one last time over the fields, you know that this harvest, this last harvest before the silence, will be remembered not for its abundance, but for the endurance it demanded, a quiet courage against the winter that is yet to arrive. You rise before dawn, the sky a bruised grey over the village, and immediately feel the bite of a cold that has grown sharper overnight. The wind carries through the gaps in the cabin walls like a restless spirit, tugging at your clothes and raising goose flesh across your arms. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and step outside, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground. Each step sends tiny clouds of frozen breath spiraling into the air, disappearing as quickly as they form. The fields lie quiet, still trembling beneath the first whisper of winter's cruelty, and even the animals sense it, lowing and bleating softly, their noises muffled by the wind that seems to speak in a language only the cold understands. Across the village, neighbors emerge from their homes with the same careful movements. Faces half hidden in scarves, they exchange nods more than words, voices swallowed by the wind before they can reach your ears. A few carry baskets of last potatoes or onions, fruits of a stubborn harvest that refuses to die entirely. You notice the way the wind bends the skeletal branches of the trees, shaking loose a few pale leaves that drift like ghosts across the frozen soil. Even the church steeple seems to lean against the gusts, as if acknowledging the harsh authority of the season. You walk toward the far fields, where the last stalks of wheat shimmer under a thin frost. The air hums faintly with the sound of ice cracking in shallow puddles and frozen ditches. Somewhere beyond the village, the river murmurs through its icy sheath, the water trapped beneath a brittle layer that groans when pressed. The sound is eerie, a soft chorus of nature warning of hardships yet to come. You pull your cloak tighter, aware that this wind is more than weather. It carries the whispers of the frost that is spreading across the land, the frost that will steal warmth from the homes, hunger from the stomachs, and hope from the hearts of even the strongest villagers. A child's cry reaches you faintly through the wind, carried in uneven gusts, and you pause, listening. The offspring are restless, sensing the chill that creeps closer with each passing hour. Mothers wrap them tighter in whatever scraps of cloth remain, rocking them slowly while the wind hisses at the walls and rattles the shutters. You think of your own home, the thin blankets, the meager fire in the hearth, and the jars of water already stiff with ice. Survival now is measured in small victories, keeping warmth against the night, protecting the livestock from the bitter cold, and scavenging what remains of the last harvest before it is buried entirely beneath snow. The wind rises again, carrying flakes of frost that sting your cheeks and sting your eyes. You bend to gather a few loose stalks from the field, listening to the hollow whisper of air moving through the village. Even as the frost scratches across your fingers, there is a strange rhythm to the day, the hush before the storm that will settle for weeks, months, until the land itself seems asleep beneath its icy weight. And as you glance back toward the cottages, smoke drifting weakly from the chimneys, you realize that these whispers in the wind are not just cold, they are a warning, a prelude to a winter that will demand every ounce of strength, cunning, and courage that you and your neighbors can summon to endure it. You step outside just as the first pale light of morning spills over the horizon, and the ground beneath your feet greets you with a stiffness that feels almost alive. Every step cracks the frozen soil, sending a shiver up your legs, as though the earth itself resists your weight. The fields, once pliant and forgiving under the plow, are now unyielding, each clod like stone, locked fast beneath the frost that has crept into every furrow. You shift your boots carefully, testing each step before committing your weight, aware that a misstep could send you tumbling or twist an ankle on the frozen unevenness. The village is hushed, the usual morning sounds swallowed by the rigid cold. Smoke from chimneys curls weakly into the air, already brittle with frost, and the wind carries the faint metallic tang of ice. You notice how even the birds move differently, hopping cautiously along fences, pecking at frozen ground with frustration. Your own breath comes out in white plumes, dissolving quickly, leaving only the bitter taste of cold at the back of your throat. You pull your cloak tighter, but it barely shields your body from the relentless chill that presses through every layer of clothing. Your hands ache as you lift the plow, frost biting at your fingers despite the thick gloves. The wooden handle is slick with ice, cold enough to make your joints stiff. You glance at the soil ahead, hard as concrete, and realize that the work will be slow, every inch a battle against the frozen earth. You place the blade carefully and press down, only to feel it bounce back slightly from the unyielding ground. A groan escapes your chest, a mix of exertion and frustration. But there is no choice. The winter will not wait for weakness. Survival demands effort, even when the world itself seems to have hardened against you. The livestock stir uneasily in the nearby pens, their hooves clicking against frozen mud. Cows shift their weight from one foot to another, kicking lightly at the icy ground, while goats nudge each other for warmth. You pause to scatter a handful of feed, each grain skittering over the ice, almost bouncing from the frozen crust. The animals' thin breaths fog the air, joining yours in a chorus of mist, small reminders that life persists even in this frozen cage. But you know it is tenuous, the frost does not discriminate, and a moment of carelessness could cost more than discomfort, it could cost life. As you trudge across the fields, boots crunching, the sun barely climbing above the horizon, the landscape stretches before you like a silent, frozen ocean. Every hill, every furrow, glimmers faintly with ice, the sheen hiding the treacherous hardness beneath. Your legs burn with the effort of walking over the unyielding ground, each step deliberate, each motion measured. The wind cuts across the open fields, pushing against you like an unseen force, and you feel the weight of the frost, not just beneath your boots, but pressing down on the shoulders, the back, the very bones. You stop to take a breath, the cold air biting at your lungs, and gaze across the fields one last time before beginning your work. The frozen earth beneath your boots is a relentless adversary, but it is the only path forward. You plant your feet, grip the plow, and start again, determined to claim what meager sustenance the land still offers. Every crack of the soil, every crunch beneath your soles, is a reminder that survival in 1709 will be earned with effort, endurance, and the stubborn refusal to yield to the winter's cruel dominion. You wake to the sound of wind lashing against the cabin walls, sharp and insistent, as though the night itself is testing your endurance. The darkness outside is thick and heavy, muffling even the faintest noise from the village beyond. You step to the window and peer out, but the world is unrecognizable, white and still, a frozen hush stretching over every hill and hollow. The river that winds past the edge of the village, usually alive with the murmur of flowing water, lies silent beneath a smooth, glassy layer of ice. It is as if the earth itself has stopped moving, holding its breath against the cruel hand of winter. Outside, the air bites at your cheeks, and your boots crunch on the frost-hardened path as you make your way toward the riverbank. Each step seems heavier than the last, the cold seeping into your bones despite your layers of cloth and leather. You can see the way the wind dances across the ice, sending tiny shards of frost glittering like broken glass, and the trees lining the banks bow beneath the weight of the snow and ice that cling to every branch. The world has become a cathedral of frost, quiet and unyielding, and you feel a shiver of awe mixed with dread. The animals stir uneasily in their pens, their breath rising in small clouds that vanish quickly into the night. Even the chickens huddle together, pressing against the frozen ground for warmth, while the cows stamp their hooves in frustration at the icy pasture. You pause for a moment, the wind tugging at your cloak, and realize how profoundly the frost has changed everything. Paths that were once soft with mud are now hard as stone, and the river lifeblood of the village is no longer a source of water, only a mirror of ice reflecting the dim grey light of a hidden moon. You trace your fingers along the rough railing of the small bridge crossing the river, feeling the chill radiate through your gloves. The ice beneath seems impossibly thick, solid enough that you could walk across without fear, yet you know better. The river hides treacherous pockets, weak spots where the current still struggles beneath the frozen surface. One misstep here could mean falling into waters no longer moving, but just as deadly, the cold seizing your limbs before you can cry out. The night is a cruel teacher, demanding attention, respect, and a careful reckoning with every step. A distant howl reaches you, carried over the frozen plains and across the river's surface, the sound hollow and lonely. Wolves have come down from the hills, drawn closer to the village by hunger and the stillness of the night. You tighten your cloak and step back from the edge, aware that even the fiercest of human will cannot command the frost or control the hunger it stirs in the wild. The river lies before you, frozen and unyielding, a monument to the winter that is not merely a season, but an adversary. You linger a moment, listening to the wind threading through the skeletal trees, the faint creak of ice expanding under its own weight, and the distant cries of the animals. The world is transformed, caught in a silence so absolute that it presses against your chest. Tonight, the rivers have turned to stone, and in their frozen stillness, you see the proof of the winter's power. Survival will demand every ounce of attention, every measure of caution, and a stubborn resolve to keep moving forward, even when the very land beneath your feet refuses to bend to your will. You step outside before the sun has risen, and immediately the sky greets you with a harshness that is almost physical. It hangs low and grey, a flat, unyielding expanse that offers no warmth, no comfort, and no hint of reprieve. The pale light filters weakly through the clouds, casting the fields and rooftops in an eerie, cold wash, as if the world itself has been drained of colour. Each breath you take curls into the frigid air, and you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, but it barely shields you from the relentless chill. Today, as every day now, the sky seems to mock your efforts, pressing down with a weight that only the frost can match. The wind sweeps across the village in sudden gusts, carrying with it the sting of ice and the sharp tang of frozen earth. You step carefully across the frost-hardened ground, boots crunching with each cautious movement. Beyond the fields, the river lies still beneath a thick layer of ice, its surface glimmering faintly in the weak dawn. Even the animals sense the cruelty above, their breath misting in the cold, bodies huddled in pens for warmth. Chickens press against one another for comfort. Goats shuffle, hooves scraping against frozen mud, and cows shift uneasily, each movement stiff with cold. The sky shows no mercy, and it seems to dictate the rhythm of life now, measuring days in frostbite and hunger. You pause at the edge of the fields, scanning the horizon where the grey clouds meet the frozen earth. The trees, stripped of their leaves, bow beneath the weight of snow and ice, branches creaking ominously. The world feels suspended, caught between the life that still clings stubbornly to the land and the death that waits patiently, unyielding. Every sound is muted under the heavy sky, the distant crowing of a rooster, the faint crunch of someone else's boots in the village, the whisper of the wind threading through the skeletal branches. Even the birds have vanished, leaving the sky empty, unbroken, and indifferent to the struggles below. Your hands ache as you gather the last of the harvest from the frost-hardened fields, fingers raw and stiff from the cold. Each stalk of wheat or barley you hold feels like a small triumph against the sky's oppressive weight, yet the victory is fragile. One gust of wind could steal the warmth from your body, one misstep could send you tumbling across the frozen soil. You glance at the clouds above, dense and featureless, and wonder if the sun itself has given up, retreating behind this endless grey. The sky without mercy shows no hint of relief, only a promise that the frost will continue, unbroken, until the land itself bends to its dominion. As you return to the village, the wind pushes against you, tugging at your cloak and chilling your skin beneath the layers of clothing. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys, barely rising before being caught in the gusts, dissolving into the grey expanse above. The village is quiet, the usual sounds of life reduced to the muted rhythm of survival. You take a moment to look upward again, at the unfeeling sky, and realize that this is the new measure of time each day, dictated by cold and wind, each movement a negotiation with frost and hunger. The sky offers no mercy, yet life endures, fragile and determined, beneath its endless, icy gaze. You return to your cabin as dusk begins to settle, the pale light fading beneath the endless grey of the winter sky. The fire in the hearth sputters weakly, its flames small and hungry, struggling against the cold that presses in through every crack in the walls. You gather a few more logs from the pile, each one already slick with frost, and toss them onto the embers. The wood hisses and spits, smoke curling upward into the drafty chimney, yet the fire still feels insubstantial, devouring itself faster than you can feed it. Every hour it dies a little more, leaving you with a chill that creeps into your bones. You kneel close, hands extended toward the flames, feeling the fleeting warmth against raw, frostbitten fingers. The logs are brittle, splitting with sharp cracks, sending sparks scattering across the hearth like miniature fireflies that vanish before they can even brighten the room. You shift slightly, trying to shield yourself from the cold draft sneaking in under the door, and the scent of burning pine mingles with the musty odor of the cabin, reminding you of the fragile security this small hearth provides. One more log, you tell yourself, then another, yet each addition seems only to delay the inevitable, for the fire is never enough. The animals in the cabin stir slightly as you tend the flames, sensing the warmth yet never truly comforted by it. The cat curls closer to the hearth, its fur puffed against the chill, while the dogs huddle on the floor, their breath misting in the air. You glance at them, noting how even life itself is tempered by this season. The fire that eats too fast mirrors the winter outside, consuming everything in its path, relentless and unyielding. You can give it wood, your effort, your care, but it will always demand more, reminding you that survival is never passive, never certain. Outside, the wind howls against the cabin walls, rattling the shutters and tugging at the smoke that barely rises from the chimney. You hear the soft groan of timber in the structure, a sound magnified by the silence of the frozen night. Each crack in the wood, each shifting beam, speaks to the effort required to hold back the cold, and you are reminded that even the walls are temporary barriers against a season that does not forgive. You lean forward again, feeding a splintered log into the fire, watching the orange glow leap and curl before fading into smoke. The warmth is fleeting, and your fingers sting despite the gloves, reminding you that winter spares no one, not even those who cling closest to flame. You pause to listen, the cabin alive with small noises, the pop of wood, the whisper of wind through cracks, the faint breathing of the animals. For a moment, the fire seems to hold, a fragile heart beating against the night, yet you know it is only a matter of time before it wanes again. You add another log, then another, moving with the slow rhythm of necessity, aware that each movement is an act of defiance against the cold that waits beyond the door. The fire eats too fast, the frost creeps too steadily, and still you endure, keeping the light alive in the darkness, one fragile flame at a time. You rise before dawn again, the grey light of winter seeping through the small cracks in your cabin walls. Your boots, stiff and frozen from the night, feel heavier than iron as you pull them on, the leather so rigid it threatens to crack under the pressure of your fingers. Each step you take sends a shiver through your legs, and the soles crunch against the frost-hardened ground as though the earth itself is resisting your passage. Your breath forms fragile clouds in the air, curling and shattering instantly into ice crystals, leaving a sharp sting at the back of your throat. Today, like every day now, movement is labor, survival is effort, and the cold is a weight pressing down from every direction. You step outside fully dressed, hands gloved, cloak wrapped tight around your shoulders, and immediately the wind hits, biting through fabric and skin alike. The village lies quiet, each roof rimmed with frost, every tree branch heavy with snow. You hear the low murmur of other villagers already moving through the morning, but the sounds are distorted by the cold air, muffled until they are little more than whispers. The horses stamp in their pens, the cows shift uneasily, and the goats scrape the frozen ground with hooves that echo like small hammers against the earth. Every movement, every sound, is a reminder that the world has changed, and you must move carefully, deliberately, to endure it. You make your way toward the fields, boots cracking with each step, and your breath rises in long, fragile veils that vanish in the wind. The The crops lie frozen, stalks stiff and brittle, bending only reluctantly under your gloved hands. Each step is measured, deliberate. The frost underfoot is treacherous, hiding pockets of uneven ground or shallow ice that could send you sprawling. Your lungs ache from the effort of drawing in the frigid air, and your chest tightens as though the cold itself is squeezing it, reminding you that every movement is a struggle. The earth beneath your feet is unforgiving, but you press forward, each step a defiance against the season that seeks to pin you in place. A distant bell tolls, its sound thin and wavering through the frozen air. It carries over the village, over the fields, across the frozen river beyond. Even sound seems brittle here, shattering in the cold like glass. You pause to listen, watching the fog of your own breath swirl in the air, shimmering like smoke before dispersing into nothing. The world feels suspended in this fragile, frozen moment, every living creature caught between life and the frost that creeps ever closer. Your boots feel heavy, your body stiff, but you continue, each step a testament to endurance, each breath a small victory against the winter that claims all warmth. You reach the first row of the harvested wheat, bent under the weight of frost, and kneel to inspect it. Fingers sting through the gloves, nails scraping against ice-crusted stalks. You gather a few handfuls, careful not to break the brittle stems, and lift them to carry back toward the barn. Each movement reminds you of the harshness of the season, boots like iron holding you firm on frozen earth, breath like glass that could shatter at any instant. And yet, as your steps crunch against the frost, as your lungs fill with sharp, cold air, you find a quiet determination, knowing that survival in 1709 depends not on comfort or warmth, but on perseverance, patience, and the stubborn refusal to yield to the endless winter pressing down from sky to ground. You step out into the pale grey light of morning, boots crunching across the frost-hardened ground, and immediately feel the weight of the day pressing on your shoulders. The cabin door creaks as you close it behind you, sealing the thin warmth of the hearth inside, knowing it will not last until your return. Today, like every day, demands a pilgrimage to the well, the village's lifeline now trapped beneath ice and frost, stubbornly refusing to yield its water. Your breath rises in fragile clouds, curling and breaking instantly in the chill, and each exhalation tastes sharp with cold, leaving your lungs burning. The path ahead stretches long and unyielding, and even the familiar steps feel treacherous under the frozen crust of snow. The air carries a harsh stillness, broken only by the crunch of your boots and the occasional creak of a nearby tree heavy with frost. Every step is deliberate, measured. The ground beneath is uneven, frozen into ridges and cracks that threaten to twist your ankle if you are not careful. The wind bites at your cheeks and neck, finding every gap in your cloak, whispering of the frost that has already claimed every inch of the village beyond the cabin walls. The journey to the well is longer than it has any right to be in warmer months, for snowdrifts have buried familiar markers, and even the road itself has hardened into something unfamiliar, slick with ice in some places, jagged in others. You pass the neighbors' cabins, smoke curling weakly from chimneys, vanishing almost immediately into the grey sky. Faces peer cautiously from behind frozen shutters, eyes wide with the same unease that gnaws at your own stomach. Children huddle close to their mothers, swaddled in blankets, while fathers lean on shovels or staffs, surveying the frost-locked land. The well is not far, and yet the walk feels endless. Each step seems to demand twice the effort it should, muscles stiff and sore from days of labor, lungs burning against the cold. You remind yourself that this is life now, every task a trial, every movement a negotiation with the frost that claims both time and strength. At last, the well appears, a dark silhouette against the pale landscape, ice-crusted and cruel. The ropes that once lowered the bucket are stiff and unyielding, frozen solid with a coat of ice. You kneel, testing the weight of the rope, and feel the stubborn resistance of the water trapped below, hidden beneath a brittle layer that threatens to shatter if disturbed. Each motion is painstaking, twisting and pulling, scraping at the ice that grips the pulley and the rope alike. Sweat mingles with the cold on your forehead, a strange paradox, and your fingers sting through the gloves, raw from the effort. Even the simplest task, drawing water, has become a battle of strength, patience, and careful judgment. Finally, a bucket is free, spilling a few precious drops before you manage to lift it fully. The water, once a simple convenience, now feels like treasure, glinting faintly in the weak light, promising life and warmth for the hours ahead. You lift it carefully, boots slipping slightly on the frozen ground, and begin the long walk back toward the cabin. Each step is heavier than before, but the prize in your hands is enough to push forward. Around you, the wind hisses through skeletal trees, and the frost glimmers over fields frozen solid. The long walk to the well is a daily endurance, a measure of strength, and a testament to survival in 1709, where even water must be earned with sweat, caution, and unwavering determination. You step beyond the last cottages, boots crunching over the frozen path, and the village falls behind you in a muted haze of smoke and frost. The fields stretch ahead, endless and barren, their soil rigid and pale beneath a thin, icy veneer. No birds stir, no animals scurry along the furrows. Everything is hushed, as if the frost itself has swallowed the sound of life. Even the wind moves differently here, not carrying chatter or laughter, but only the low, constant sigh of ice pressing against the earth. The silence of empty fields is heavier than cold. It presses against your chest, fills your ears, and makes each breath seem loud and intrusive in the stillness. You bend to examine a stalk of wheat, brittle and frost-covered, its golden head nearly shattering under the pressure of your fingers. The harvest is long gone. What remains is skeletal, a ghost of abundance past. Each step through the fields is careful, measured, for the ground beneath is uneven with frozen ridges and hidden ice pockets that could send you sprawling without warning. Your boots grind against the frost, sending sparks of frost flying into the pale morning air. Even the sunlight is hesitant, a feeble wash of grey that does little to warm the bones or lighten the oppressive quiet. As you walk further, the wind carries faint echoes of what used to be distant shouts from the village, the creak of the barn doors, the clatter of tools, but they are swallowed almost immediately by the vast stillness of the fields. There is a hollow quality to the silence, a sense that the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for some unseen force to awaken it. You shiver, both from cold and unease, and pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The empty fields stretch in every direction, unbroken except for the occasional frost-crusted fence or withered tree. Even the small rivulets that once carried water across the land are sealed under sheets of ice, glinting faintly like glass in the muted light. You pause at the crest of a small hill, surveying the frozen expanse. The horizon is low and grey, the sky pressing down without mercy, the snow glimmering faintly in the dim light. The silence feels alive, almost sentient, as if the frost itself watches every movement, measures every breath. Your own heart seems louder than it should, thumping against ribs tightened by chill and exertion. Somewhere beyond the distant tree line, a faint rustle, a small animal perhaps, reminds you that life still clings stubbornly to this frozen world. But the vast majority of the land lies dead to sound and warmth. You kneel, brushing snow from a furrow to inspect the frozen earth beneath, and find it cracked and rigid, the soil hardened to stone-like consistency. Nothing stirs here, not even the insects that once crawled beneath the surface. The silence is complete, oppressive, and yet it teaches a lesson in endurance. Life continues only through effort, through vigilance, and through stubborn refusal to yield. You rise, adjust your cloak, and continue your careful trek across the fields, each step measured, each movement deliberate. The silence of empty fields surrounds you like a living thing, cold and unrelenting, yet within it you feel the fragile pulse of survival, the knowledge that even beneath frost and quiet, life persists, fragile, determined, and waiting for those willing to endure the winter's harsh dominion. You return to the village as the pale morning light struggles through the heavy grey sky, and the scene that greets you is quiet, but not the gentle quiet of sleeping earth. It is tense, expectant, laced with unease. Doors are cracked open, faces peeking through, eyes wide with worry and shadows under them from nights spent shivering. Your own cabin is barely warm, the hearth struggling to hold what little heat it can, and yet you hear the faint knocks, the scraping of boots on frozen thresholds. Your neighbors have come, seeking small comfort, seeking what little you might share, for winter of 1709 has made even familiar faces wary and desperate. You open the door, and a chill rushes in, carrying the scent of frost and wet wool. There, huddled on the threshold, is old Marta from the next house, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, hands trembling despite thick gloves. She looks at you, eyes wide, as if the cold itself had driven her to your door. Behind her, her offspring cling, pale-faced and shivering, silent save for the occasional sniffle. She speaks quickly, her words rushing like the wind outside, describing a fire that has faltered, bread that has run out, and a well-frozen solid. You nod, listening, letting her words sink in, knowing that your own provisions are meager, but refusing to turn them away. The children peek around her legs, eyes filled with curiosity and fear, and you notice the gaunt lines of hunger on their faces, the way their small hands clutch at her skirts. The animals in the yard stir slightly, sensing the tension, hooves clicking against frozen mud. The villagers around you shift, careful not to crowd but seeking reassurance, small gestures of solidarity in a time when warmth and food are rare commodities. You offer what you can, a slice of bread, a small handful of grain, and feel the weight of responsibility settle heavily on your shoulders. Each gift is a small victory, a quiet defiance against the winter that seeks to isolate and starve. The wind howls outside, tugging at coats and shawls, rattling shutters, and sending a thin spray of snow across the frozen street. Inside, the air is filled with whispered words, cautious questions, and quiet thanks. You listen as neighbors compare notes about frostbitten hands, failing fires, and livestock that will not survive the night. Every story reinforces the reality that survival is no longer solitary. Even the strongest hearth cannot defend a family alone. Community, sharing, and small acts of care are what will carry you through the days ahead. You watch them leave eventually, stepping back into the grey light, bundled against the wind, carrying with them a portion of warmth, a fragment of hope. And as you close your door, the quiet returns, though it feels different now. The silence is not oppressive, but measured, tempered with the knowledge that each knock, each visit, is a lifeline. Neighbors at the door are reminders that, even in a winter that spares nothing, connection and courage endure. The frost presses close, the sky hangs heavy, and the fields lie still. But within the walls of this small village, survival is a shared task, and every hand extended is a defiance against the merciless cold that stretches beyond. You wake to a sharp wind cutting through the village, swirling snow along the frozen streets and rattling shutters against their frames. The cabin is cold despite the small fire in the hearth, its warmth barely enough to chase away the frost clinging to your skin. Hunger gnaws at your stomach, a slow, insistent reminder of the scarcity that has become daily life in 1709. Today, as every day, the most pressing question is not of comfort or leisure, but of sustenance. And at the center of that need lies the last loaf of bread, hard and dry, yet more precious than gold. You pull your cloak tighter and step outside, boots cracking against the frozen earth. The village is hushed, every movement muffled beneath the thick coat of frost. Smoke curls weakly from chimneys, barely carrying warmth into the bitter air. In the marketplace, the shelves that once held sacks of flour and bundles of grain are now empty, the few remaining crumbs jealously guarded. You make your way there, careful to avoid slipping on patches of ice, knowing that today the last loaf might be claimed by someone else if you hesitate. Each step feels heavier than the last, burdened by the knowledge that every action, every decision carries weight in this unforgiving season. At the bakery, the scent of burned wood and faint smoke still lingers, but the counters are bare. Behind the glass, a single loaf rests, crust hard and cracked, its interior dense and pale. You kneel slightly, brushing the frost from its surface, and feel a strange sense of reverence. This loaf is more than food, it is hope, the measure of life itself against the merciless winter. You wrap it carefully in a cloth, holding it close to your chest to shield it from the chill, feeling its weight and knowing that it must be rationed, shared if necessary, and cherished as one would a treasure. The children in the village peek from behind door frames, eyes wide, stomachs rumbling, and you see reflected in them the same hunger that presses on your own ribs. Mothers clutch their offspring tightly, whispering hurried prayers for warmth and sustenance, while fathers glance toward the skies as if pleading with the frozen sun to yield even a fraction of mercy. You step back into the cold, loaf in hand, aware that every breath you draw forms fragile clouds of mist, dissipating instantly in the icy air. Each step toward home is a small triumph, but also a reminder of fragility. The frost waits for any misstep, any slip, ready to punish carelessness with cold or worse. Inside your cabin, you place the loaf near the hearth, the flames casting a feeble orange glow over its cracked crust. You slice a small piece, feeling the hardness beneath your fingers, and taste it carefully, savoring the warmth and sustenance it offers. It is not enough to fill the stomach fully, but it is enough to remind you that survival is possible, that even in a winter so cruel it steals comfort, life can persist. Outside, the wind continues to howl, snow drifts against the walls, and the silence of empty fields stretches across the horizon. But inside, for this moment, the last loaf of bread is a small, defiant flame against the winter that seeks to consume all. You rise before dawn, the grey light of winter pressing down on the village with an unrelenting chill. Your fingers ache as you pull on your gloves, stiff from the cold that has seeped into every crevice of the cabin overnight. The fire in the hearth struggles against the drafty walls, flickering weakly as you step outside, and your boots crunch across frost-hardened paths. Today, like every day, the question of sustenance presses heavily upon you, and your eyes turn toward the small supply of salted meat hanging in the barn. Once a luxury to be eaten sparingly, it has now become both necessity and treasure, a lifeline frozen solid, hard as stone, and almost impossible to slice. The barn door groans on its hinges as you push it open, the wind slipping in to bite at your cheeks and wrists. Inside, the animals shift uneasily, noses twitching at your presence. Their own struggle against cold and hunger mirrors your own. You approach the small wooden beam from which the salted meat hangs, each strip encased in a thin layer of frost that glints faintly in the weak morning light. You tug at one carefully, feeling the resistance of ice-crusted salt and sinew, and slice it slowly, the knife scraping against frozen edges. Even the smallest piece demands effort, and your fingers sting through gloves as you work, every movement deliberate, measured, and mindful of waste. Outside, the wind whistles across the frozen fields, tugging at your cloak, scattering loose hay across the barn floor. You pause to listen, hearing only the hollow echo of your movements and the faint creak of timber settling under frost's weight. The village is still, muted under winter's dominance, and even the animals are quiet, conserving energy against the relentless cold. You lift the sliced meat, feeling its hard texture and tasting the salt on your lips, realizing that each morsel is a small victory against the frost that seeks to claim every ounce of warmth and life. Children appear at the edge of the barnyard, eyes wide with hunger and anticipation, their offspring small and trembling in blankets too thin to shield them from the cold. Mothers hold them close, whispering hurried instructions about sharing and rationing, while fathers watch cautiously, hands clenched to stave off both chill and anxiety. You hand a small slice to one of the children, careful to measure so that it lasts. Even this, the simplest act of sustenance, is heavy with significance. The salted meat is not merely food, it is survival, a reminder that life endures only through careful planning, shared effort, and the stubborn will to keep moving forward despite unrelenting frost. You sit briefly on the hay-strewn floor, chewing slowly, tasting the sharp saltiness and feeling it warm your mouth. Outside, the snow drifts in thin sheets across the barnyard, the wind moaning through the skeletal trees, and the frozen earth stretches unbroken into the distance. Yet within this small, dimly lit barn, there is a fragile pulse of life sustained by a few slices of salted meat, hard as stone, that remind you of the precariousness of existence. Each bite is a quiet defiance against the winter, a small assertion that the frost may be vast and merciless, but it has not yet claimed everything. The work is not over, the cold not defeated, but for now you endure, sustained by patience, effort, and the strength to survive another day beneath the grey, unyielding sky. You wake with a hollow ache in your stomach, a dull gnaw that has become a constant companion over the last weeks. The fire in the hearth flickers weakly, smoke curling upward but offering little warmth, and the frost clings to the edges of the windows as though mocking your effort. Every breath carries the chill of early morning, sharp and biting, and you pull your cloak tighter, trying to preserve the heat your body still clings to. Hunger is not simply an emptiness, it is a taste, bitter and lingering, pressing against your tongue and throat, reminding you that every day in 1709 is a measure of endurance. The village is quiet as you step outside, the snow crunching beneath your boots, the wind carrying a harsh, icy tang that stings your cheeks. Fields stretch before you, skeletal and frozen, crops gone or frostbitten, the soil hard as stone beneath your feet. Even the livestock seems subdued, heads low, bodies pressed together for warmth. Each step toward the barn or storeroom is slow, deliberate, because even the simplest exertion burns energy you cannot afford to waste. Hunger is a constant companion now, a reminder that the winter claims not only warmth but also the strength needed to procure it. You enter the barn and glance at the meager supply of food. A few crusts of bread, salted meat, stiff and frozen, some roots dug from the frost-bound soil. Each morsel carries with it both relief and despair, the small satisfaction of sustenance, tempered by the knowledge that it is scarcely enough to fill a stomach already accustomed to emptiness. You tear a piece of bread carefully, mindful of waste, chewing slowly, feeling its dryness scratch the inside of your mouth. The taste is bitter, coated with salt and the lingering memory of what it once was, a reminder of abundance now lost to frost and famine. Outside, the wind whistles through the skeletal trees, and even the sounds of the village seem muted beneath the oppressive sky. You notice neighbors huddled near their own hearths, children clinging to mothers, eyes wide and hollow with longing. Parents exchange wary glances, each silently measuring their own reserves against the need of the offspring. Hunger is a shared burden, spreading from house to house, a constant pressure that binds the village together in quiet suffering. The bitter taste is not just in the mouth, but in the heart, a reminder that survival demands not only strength, but vigilance, patience, and careful rationing of every scrap of food and warmth. You take a sip of water from a frozen bucket, each drop tasting faintly metallic, and you chew the small slice of meat you have saved, noting how tough and dry it is, how it barely nourishes. And yet, you continue, because to do otherwise is unthinkable. Every motion, every effort to feed yourself or your family is an act of defiance against the frost, the wind, and the relentless scarcity that defines this season. Hunger is bitter, yes, but it is also a teacher, sharpening your senses, your awareness, and your appreciation for the smallest comforts: a flicker of fire, a morsel of bread, the warmth of shared bodies in the long, frozen nights. You rise, gather what supplies you can, and step back into the grey morning, boots crunching over ice, breath curling like fragile glass, carrying with you the bitter taste of hunger and the stubborn resolve to endure another day. You wake to the pale light of another winter morning, the sky heavy and grey, pressing down upon the village like a stone ceiling. The frost has crept even into the narrow streets, glinting along cobblestones and frozen mud, making each step uncertain and slow. Hunger presses at your stomach, an unrelenting ache that sharpens with the cold. Today, as on many days before, you make your way toward the market, hoping against hope that anything remains to be claimed, to be traded, to sustain life. The path to the market is treacherous, boots slipping across icy ruts, breath rising in fragile clouds that curl and vanish into the biting wind. You pass the houses along the way, doors cracked open, neighbors huddled inside, faces pale and drawn. Children cling to mothers, offspring small and shivering in layers of blankets that offer scant protection against the frost. Even the animals seem subdued, heads low, hooves dragging through the frozen snow. There is an uneasy quiet, the kind that presses in on your chest, and you realize that everyone is thinking the same thing, that the market might hold a morsel, a scrap, a lifeline. When you arrive, the scene is worse than you imagined. The stalls, once overflowing with the bounty of summer and autumn, are stripped bare. Flour sacks lie empty, their sides caved in. Baskets that once held root, vegetables and tubers now sit like hollow shells. Meat, fish, and poultry are gone, long since taken or frozen beyond use. The few loaves of bread that remain are small, hard, and cracked, rationed sparingly among villagers who wait with anxious eyes. You step carefully between the stalls, scanning the frozen counters, and feel a hollow weight in your chest. The market without food is more than an inconvenience. It is a declaration that survival is now a test of endurance, cunning, and patience. A few villagers gather in quiet clusters, whispering urgently to each other. Mothers measure scraps against offspring's hunger. Fathers barter what little they have in exchange for hope. The air is thick with tension and the metallic tang of frost, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from distant chimneys. You offer a nod to one neighbor, a silent acknowledgement that everyone is suffering and that the day will demand careful management of the meager supplies available. Even a small exchange of salt, a slice of meat, or a handful of grain carries enormous significance, a fragile thread of life in the frozen stillness. You move along the rows of empty stalls, noting the frozen buckets of water, the ice-crusted barrels, and the remnants of what once sustained the village. The wind cuts sharply, tugging at your cloak, swirling snow along the paths, and you feel it pressing against your face as though it wishes to drive you back. And yet you press forward, collecting what you can: a small slice of bread, a root dug from the frost-hardened ground, a few scraps of salted meat from a generous neighbor. Every step back toward your cabin feels heavier than the first, burdened with both the precious supplies and the knowledge of scarcity that surrounds you. Inside the cabin, the hearth flickers weakly, casting small shadows over the walls. You set down the supplies carefully, rationing each morsel to sustain you and your family through the hours ahead. Outside, the village remains quiet, the market empty, the frost unbroken, yet within this small shelter, life persists. The market without food is a stark reminder of the season's cruelty, but it is also a measure of resilience. Every morsel saved, every careful step taken, every shared piece of warmth is a quiet defiance against the merciless winter, a determination to endure another day under a sky that offers no comfort and an earth that demands everything. You step outside before dawn, the grey light of the winter sky barely illuminating the village, and the air strikes your face with a frost so sharp it makes your cheeks ache. The world is silent, save for the faint crunch of your boots across hardened snow and ice. The fields beyond the cabins stretch pale and empty, each furrow frozen rigid, and your breath curls into the frigid air like fragile glass. There is a weight to the stillness, an expectant hush that presses down upon the village. And then, from the edge of the forest, a glimmer catches your eye, the faint, unyielding reflection of amber in the snow. The wolves have come closer this year, drawn by hunger as relentless as your own. Their eyes gleam with intelligence and need, unblinking and fixed upon the village, calculating, patient. You pause mid-step, the air thick with frost and fear, and watch as one of the creatures steps cautiously onto the frozen path, its fur mottled with snow, breath rising in pale clouds. It tilts its head, assessing the distance, gauging the weakness or opportunity in the small cluster of cottages before it. You feel a shiver not entirely from the cold, a primal recognition that the hunger pressing through your own body mirrors the predators, though in vastly different forms. The animals in your yard sense the presence before you fully perceive it. Chickens huddle silently, heads tucked under wings, and goats press against one another, ears flicking toward the darkened tree line. The cows shift uneasily, lowing softly, their breaths forming misty plumes that vanish into the frozen air. The wind carries the faint rustle of dry branches, the whisper of movement across hardened earth, and for a moment the forest seems alive with silent anticipation. The wolves' eyes, glinting amber in the shadow of the trees, are a reminder that the world beyond the village is as unforgiving as the frost itself. You clutch the handle of your small hatchet, the wood slick and cold against your gloves, and take a cautious step back toward the cabin. The wolves move slowly, deliberately, their paws barely making a sound on the snow that hides hidden ice and frozen debris. You notice the subtle flick of tails, the careful placement of claws, the way they seem to glide rather than walk, bodies poised for the slightest opportunity. Hunger drives them closer, yet there is an intelligence in their approach, a strategy honed by necessity, mirroring the vigilance that you have cultivated over these endless weeks of frost and scarcity. The first light of dawn begins to creep over the horizon, a faint grey washing across the frozen fields. The wolves pause, eyes fixed, ears alert, then retreat slightly into the forest, bodies blending with shadow and snow. You exhale slowly, feeling the tension drain from your shoulders. Yet the awareness remains. The world beyond the village is filled with dangers, both seen and unseen. You glance back toward your own home, the thin smoke curling from the chimney, a fragile shield against the frost, against hunger, against the predators that watch from the edges. You step carefully toward the cabin, boots cracking over ice, breath curling like fragile smoke, and realize that survival in 1709 demands constant vigilance. Every shadow, every glimmer in the snow carries significance. The wolf's eyes in the snow are not merely a threat, they are a measure, a mirror of hunger and endurance, a warning that life persists only through caution, effort, and an unyielding resolve to withstand the cold, the famine, and the wilderness that presses ever closer. You wake to darkness that seems to stretch farther than the eye can reach, a grey-black curtain that presses down on the village and smothers every hint of dawn. The frost has hardened overnight, making the air so sharp it feels like tiny knives against your cheeks. The fire in the hearth flickers weakly, struggling against the draft that creeps through every crack in the cabin walls. Outside, the wind sighs and moans through the skeletal trees, carrying snowflakes that sting the skin like shards of glass. The endless night has settled upon the land, and it is not a night that will end quickly, not with warmth or comfort, but with cold that stretches from one day into the next, unbroken and merciless. Your boots crunch over the frozen floorboards as you step outside to check the animals. Chickens are silent, heads tucked beneath wings. Goats press close to one another, huddled for warmth. Cows shift slowly, exhaling plumes of mist that vanish instantly into the frigid air. Even the familiar sounds of life are muted, as though the frost itself has stolen them, leaving only the whisper of wind and the brittle groan of ice against wood. You draw a deep breath, tasting the sharp sting of winter on your tongue, and feel the weight of the night pressing down, heavier than any darkness you have known. The horizon offers no promise of light. Clouds hang low, swollen with snow yet to fall, a blanket of grey that merges seamlessly with the frozen earth. The village appears small and fragile beneath it, smoke from chimneys rising in thin, twisting threads before vanishing completely. You notice the stillness in the fields, the skeletal remains of crops bowed under frost, and the frozen rivers that gleam like mirrors in the pale dark. It is a silence that is alive, pressing against your chest, weighing on every step, every thought, every breath. You return to the cabin and kneel near the hearth, feeding the fire with a log stiff and frosted at the ends. The flames leap briefly, casting weak light across the room, only to shrink again, devoured faster than you can supply it. The smell of burning wood mixes with the chill in the air, and for a fleeting moment, it feels as though life itself clings to the fragile warmth. You take a piece of bread, hard and dry, tasting it slowly, savoring what little comfort it offers against the pervasive cold. Hunger presses alongside the frost, a constant companion, reminding you that survival is not a given but a measure of effort, patience, and vigilance. Outside, the wind rises, rattling shutters and bending tree branches, carrying the distant howl of some unseen creature. The endless night stretches across the frozen land, swallowing sound and movement alike. You sit, fingers aching, heart heavy, listening to the hollow rhythm of the winter world, aware that this is only one of many nights to come, each as long as silent and as unforgiving as the last. And yet, within the cabin, within the fragile circle of firelight, there is a pulse of life, fragile and persistent, a reminder that even in the endless night, warmth, courage, and survival endure. You awaken before the first grey light of dawn has touched the village, the cabin steeped in a silence that presses against your chest. The fire in the hearth has died down to glowing embers, weak and feeble, unable to push back the frost that creeps along the floorboards and bites at your bare skin. You pull the quilt tighter around your shoulders, but it offers little protection against the chill that seems to settle in your bones overnight. Even under layers of cloth, the cold is relentless, seeping through every fold, every seam, leaving you shivering in the quiet dark. The children stir beneath their own quilts, small bodies trembling despite layers of blankets. Their soft whimpers rise and fall, mingling with the occasional sigh of wind through cracks in the cabin walls. You kneel beside them, hands shaking as you smooth the blankets over their shoulders, pressing them close, trying to transfer some warmth that you scarcely possess yourself. Each small motion is a careful negotiation against frost, a tender effort to hold life in a season that seems intent on stealing it. The offspring clutch at you instinctively, seeking comfort in the faint heat that radiates from your own body, a fragile bond against the cruelty outside. Outside, the village lies silent, streets white and frozen, the remnants of snow drifting in thin sheets along the narrow paths. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, dissipating almost immediately into the cold grey sky. Even the animals seem subdued, lowing and bleating softly, their bodies pressed together for warmth. You glance toward the barn, noting how the frost glistens along the edges of the pen, and realize that survival now depends on careful balance, warmth, food, and vigilance. The quilts are more than blankets, they are shields, fragile bulwarks against the cold that presses in from every side. You wrap yourself further in the quilt, feeling the stiffness of the fabric under frost and cold, and settle back against the wall. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, casting weak light across the cabin, highlighting the pale, drawn faces of your family. The cold is everywhere, in the air, in the floor, in the very walls of the cabin. Each breath forms a curling cloud that disappears instantly, a fleeting warmth against the chill that dominates every corner. You press closer to the children, feeling their tiny bodies quiver, and whisper reassurances, though you are aware that the words do little to ward off the frost or the hunger pressing at your bellies. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the shutters and tugging at the thin quilt draped over the doorway. You hear distant noises, the crunch of frozen snow under boots, a faint scrape of ice along the riverbank, but mostly there is stillness, a heavy, suffocating quiet that amplifies the shivering inside. You close your eyes briefly, drawing warmth from the small circle of life pressed beneath the blankets, and realize that survival is measured not in abundance, but in endurance. Each shiver beneath the quilt is a reminder of the frost that waits beyond the walls, the hunger that gnaws, and the resilience needed to survive another day. You sit quietly, drawing your own breath slowly, willing the warmth to linger a moment longer beneath the quilts, and feel a fragile comfort in the closeness of the family. Outside, the world remains harsh and unyielding, but within this small cabin, shivering under quilts, there is persistence, there is life, and there is the quiet courage to face the merciless winter ahead. You awaken to the faint, uneven wails of offspring, muffled beneath layers of blankets, yet sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the cabin. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to faint embers, the smoke curling weakly upward before vanishing into the cold draught that seeps through every crack in the walls. Your body aches from the night spent shivering, and the chill from the frost pressing through the cabin makes even movement a labor. You rise carefully, knees stiff, and approach the small figures huddled beneath quilts, fragile bodies trembling with cold, hunger, and the instinctive fear that comes with the endless winter of 1709. The children's cries grow louder as you draw near, tiny voices insistent and desperate, demanding warmth, attention, and reassurance. Their eyes glint with the faint glow of firelight, wide and imploring, mouths trembling as they call out in tones that mix hunger, discomfort, and instinct. You wrap your own arms around them, feeling the delicate weight of their bodies against your chest, shivering along with them, a shared cold that binds you together. Each movement is cautious, mindful of their fragility, aware that even the smallest jostle can pierce sleep or stir tears from exhaustion. Outside, the wind presses against the cabin walls, rattling shutters and tugging at the roof with a force that seems to echo the cries within. You hear the faint scrape of snow across the frozen paths, the occasional lowing of animals in the barn, and the distant hollow whistle of the frost-laden river. Every sound underscores the precariousness of life in the village. You glance toward the doorway, noting the pale light of early morning glinting across the snow-drifted landscape, and feel the weight of the world pressing against the cabin, as if the frost itself seeks to penetrate every corner, every quilt, every heart. You hum softly, a gentle attempt to calm the offspring, your voice fragile against the night and frost. One child burrows deeper into your chest, tiny hands clutching at the folds of your coat, seeking warmth, seeking safety, seeking the small comfort you can offer against the relentless winter. Hunger presses at your own stomach, but it is the cry of offspring that demands action, that compels care beyond your own need. You adjust the quilt, pressing it tighter around their small shoulders, and rock them gently, feeling the faint rhythm of their breath gradually synchronize with your own. The embers of the hearth offer little heat, but it is enough to create a small island of warmth amid the pervasive cold. You reach for a small scrap of bread, hard and dry, breaking it carefully into pieces that the children nibble hesitantly, tasting sustenance against the bitter hunger that gnaws at them. Outside, the frost glints in the weak morning light, and the wind howls, yet within the cabin, the fragile warmth, the shared shivering, and the quiet attentiveness to the cry of offspring forms a shield, however thin, against the winter's merciless grip. You stay close, holding them under the thin blanket, listening to the cries gradually soften, sighs and small whimpers replacing the sharper calls. Each sound is a reminder of fragility and endurance, of vulnerability and the stubborn persistence of life. The cry of offspring is not merely a sound of hunger or fear, it is a call to continue, to protect, to survive. And as the embers flicker faintly in the hearth, you press them close, shivering together under quilts, aware that survival in 1709 is measured not by abundance, but by the care and courage with which you answer the cry of offspring against a world frozen and merciless. You rise on a morning that feels no different from night, the sky heavy and grey, the air sharp enough to sting the inside of your lungs with every breath. The fire has withered to ash in the hearth, leaving the cabin cold, its timbers creaking as the frost presses against them. You step outside, boots crunching over the frozen ground, and the village greets you with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a silence so absolute that it unsettles the heart. Even the church at the center of the village, once a place of gathering and sound, lies quiet, its bells stilled by frost, their voices trapped in ice. You make your way along the narrow path, snow drifts piled high against the walls of cottages, smoke rising weakly from chimneys. The villagers move like shadows, heads bent, breaths curling in clouds that vanish instantly into the frozen air. Every face bears the same hollow look, hunger etched into cheeks, cold pressing into skin, eyes dulled by exhaustion. And yet they all glance toward the church, as if expecting its bells to call them, as if waiting for the familiar toll that once marked the rhythm of life. Morning prayers, evening vespers, the celebration of feast days, the solemn toll for the departed. Now, only silence reigns. You reach the church doors, wood stiff with frost, iron hinges crackling as they yield. Inside, the air is no warmer, your breath rising in faint plumes that dissolve among the rafters. Candles flicker weakly, their light doing little to push back the gloom. At the far end, the bell ropes hang stiff, frozen in place, coated with ice so thick it glitters faintly in the dim light. The bells themselves, high in the tower, are locked in frost, their tongues trapped, their voices silenced by a season more powerful than any hand that might pull the ropes. You close your eyes, recalling how those bells once carried across the fields, their tones rich and steady, weaving through the air like threads of hope. Their sound once bound the village together, marking time, calling to worship, summoning neighbors to comfort the grieving. Now, their silence weighs heavily, a reminder that even the sacred can be muted by frost. The church is filled with whispers, prayers spoken quietly, voices trembling not only from reverence but from cold. People kneel on frozen floors, their knees pressing into stone hard as iron, their lips moving steadily, their words clouding into faint mist. Faith, like fire, endures, though it burns low and fragile in this season. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the shutters, carrying with it the low howl of wolves from the forest edge. The villagers draw their cloaks tighter, gathering together near the steps, eyes fixed on the silent tower. The absence of sound is louder than any noise, pressing into ears, echoing through the chest. Frozen church bells, unyielding and still, mirror the frozen fields, the frozen rivers, the frozen hearts pressed by hunger and cold. You linger for a moment, staring upward, before turning back toward your cabin. The silence of the bells follows you, heavy and unbroken, yet it carries a strange resolve. Even when frost steals the sound, the memory of their voice endures. And in that memory lies a fragile thread of hope that one day, when the ice relents, the bells will ring again, carrying across the fields to remind the village that life, though fragile, can endure the silence of even the cruelest winter. You lie awake beneath the weight of quilts, shivering despite the layers, the frost pressing through the cabin walls as if determined to seep into your very bones. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to a faint glow, embers pulsing weakly in the dark. Hunger gnaws at your stomach, but it is the cold that grips you most tightly, turning each breath into a brittle plume of glass in the air. You close your eyes against the endless grey of the morning sky, and your mind, starved for warmth, drifts toward places the body cannot go. You begin to dream of summer. In the vision, the fields are no longer rigid with frost, but alive with swaying stalks of wheat, their golden heads nodding gently in the breeze. The soil is warm beneath your boots, soft and pliant, releasing the scent of earth rich with promise. The sun climbs high overhead, its rays spreading warmth across your skin, melting the ache in your joints, loosening the stiffness in your hands. Birds wheel and dive in the bright sky, their cries clear and sharp, so unlike the muffled silence of the frozen fields outside your door. For a moment the winter fades, replaced by the memory of life, color, and abundance. You walk further into the dream, past rows of vegetables bursting from the soil, their leaves green and full, past orchards heavy with fruit, their branches bending under the weight. The air hums with insects, with the music of bees moving from blossom to blossom. Livestock graze lazily in the pasture, fat and strong, their movements slow, unhurried, without the restless hunger that now drives them to paw at frozen ground. Water flows freely in the river, glinting under the sunlight, carrying the laughter of children splashing along its banks. In this imagined summer, the world feels boundless, forgiving, filled with the simple joy of survival unthreatened. A sudden draft through the cabin shakes you from the dream for a moment, the cold biting sharply at your cheeks, the wind rattling the shutters. You pull the quilt tighter and drift again into reverie, holding the images of warmth close. Neighbors gather in the village square, baskets heavy with bread, meat and grain. The market stalls are alive with color and sound, voices raised in cheer, hands busy in trade. Even the church bells ring freely in the dream, their tones deep and steady, echoing across fields green with life. You feel the smile tug at your lips in sleep, the body momentarily fooled into believing in heat, in fullness, in ease. But when your eyes open again, the cabin is as it was, frost creeping across the window panes, smoke rising thinly from the hearth, children curled under blankets, their small bodies trembling with cold. The silence of the endless winter presses in once more, and the dream of summer fades like mist. Still, you cling to it, because such dreams are more than escape, they are endurance. They are the warmth the frost cannot touch, the reminder that seasons turn, that even the most merciless winter must one day give way to fields alive with color and Sunday. And so you lie back, shivering under quilts, dreaming of summer, and for a moment the cold feels just a little less heavy. You step into the pale grey morning, boots crunching across the frozen yard, the wind tugging at your cloak with icy fingers. The barn looms ahead, its roof sagging under the weight of snow, timbers groaning faintly as if burdened by the season itself. You pull the latch with stiff fingers, the wood cold enough to sting even through your gloves, and push the heavy door open. The hinges creak once, then fall silent. Inside, there is no noise, no clatter of hooves, no shuffle of animals settling into straw, no lowing, no bleating, no cluck of restless wings. The barn without sound is heavier than any storm, heavier even than hunger. You pause at the threshold, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. The air is thick, with the smell of frost and hay, sharp with the faint tang of salt where meat once hung, now long gone. The stalls stretch out before you, shadows filling corners where animals once stirred, but now they lie empty or still. The goats, once stubborn and noisy, press together silently, their thin bodies trembling, eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. A cow shifts its weight but does not voice complaint, her ribs standing out like ridges beneath a dull coat. Even the chickens, once a riot of clucks and scratches, perch without motion, their heads tucked low, feathers puffed yet quiet. You walk slowly down the row, boots pressing into frozen straw that crunches beneath your weight. The air hangs heavy with silence, so complete that you hear the echo of your own breath, brittle and quick in the chill. You reach out to stroke the cow's side, and she shifts slightly, exhaling a plume of mist, but makes no sound. Hunger has stilled them, weakened their voices, muted their protests. The barn, once alive with the rhythm of life, has become a hollow place where survival is measured in quiet endurance. The wind seeps through cracks in the walls, stirring loose hay into the air. Sunlight filters faintly through the gaps in the boards, catching on dust and frost, turning them to fleeting motes of light before they vanish back into shadow. You close your eyes, remembering the barn as it was in warmer months, filled with the laughter of offspring chasing chickens, the steady rhythm of milk streaming into pails, the clatter of tools, the earthy smell of animals fat with summer grazing. That memory presses painfully against the silence now, and you open your eyes again, unwilling to linger too long in what was. You scatter a meager handful of feed, watching the goats nose at it silently, their hunger evident in every small movement. The chickens stir faintly, scratching at the frozen floor, yet they do so without sound, their usual chatter swallowed by the cold. You lean against a beam, listening to the stillness, aware of how fragile life has become in this frozen season. The barn without sound is not empty, it is filled with a quiet that speaks of struggle, of exhaustion, of the heavy price exacted by the frost. You close the door behind you as you leave, the latch clicking softly into place. The silence lingers even outside, following you into the yard, pressing against your ears, your chest, your thoughts. The barn without sound is more than a building muted by winter, it is a reflection of the world itself, a reminder that even the most familiar places can be stripped of their voice, leaving only endurance in the face of the great frost's unrelenting grip. You set out before dawn, the sky a flat and endless grey, the air sharp enough to sting with every breath you take. The road stretches ahead, little more than a frozen path buried beneath drifts of snow and sheets of ice. Each step is a struggle, your boots crunching, slipping, catching again, the weight of your body pulled against the stubborn surface of the frost-hardened earth. The wind sweeps across the open fields, carrying with it a soundless emptiness, as if the world itself has been muted beneath the great frost. You tell yourself there must be something ahead, food, warmth, relief, but the road offers no promise, only distance. The village disappears behind you quickly, its chimneys thinly smoking, cabins crouched against the relentless wind. Soon all you see is white upon white, snow layering the fields until the horizon itself seems to vanish. The trees stand like gaunt sentinels, their branches stripped bare, their bark glazed in ice that glimmers faintly beneath the weak light of morning. You walk steadily, breath rising in fragile clouds, each exhalation stolen by the wind before it can linger. Hunger gnaws at your stomach, your limbs ache with cold, but you press forward, clinging to the thought that something, anything might lie at the road's end. As the hours pass, the silence becomes oppressive. Even the sound of your own boots feels out of place, loud in the vast emptiness. The road winds on, unbroken by villages, farms, or movement of any kind. You pause occasionally to catch your breath, leaning against a frozen fence post or kneeling to brush the snow from your knees, but there is nothing to break the monotony of the endless path. The stillness presses in, whispering doubts with every gust of wind. Perhaps there is no destination, no relief, only the cold stretch of land repeating itself forever. Your thoughts drift to the warmth of your cabin, the flicker of firelight against rough-hewn walls, the muffled laughter that once filled its corners before hunger dulled every voice. You think of the barn, quiet as a tomb, the animals pressing together in silence, their strength waning. You think of the neighbors, faces pale and drawn, eyes wide with desperation. All of them wait for answers, for sustenance, for hope. You had left believing the road might offer them something, but as the distance unravels beneath your boots, all you find is more of the same: snow, wind, silence, and cold. The sun never truly rises. It drifts behind the clouds like a smudge of pale light, casting little warmth, offering no guidance. Shadows stretch long across the snow, twisting your perspective, making the road seem both near and distant. You continue walking, but the landscape does not change. It is as though the frost itself has conspired to trap you in place, giving the illusion of progress while holding you in its frozen grasp. At last, as evening begins to settle, you stop. The horizon remains the same, empty and white, the road vanishing into nothingness. Your breath comes heavy, your legs tremble from exertion, and you realize the truth that has been pressing on you all along. This is the long road to nowhere. There is no destination, no relief, no escape from the frost. Only endurance, only the slow and stubborn act of turning back, step by weary step, to the small warmth of home, to face once more the merciless grip of the great frost. You arrive at the city after a long march through fields stripped bare by frost, your boots heavy with ice, your breath curling like smoke in the frozen air. Towers rise ahead of you, grey and unyielding, their outlines softened by snow clinging to every ledge and crevice. The walls are rimmed with frost, their stones slick and glistening beneath a pale sun that offers no warmth. Once, the city might have seemed grand, its gates busy with traders and carts, its squares alive with voices and footsteps. Now it looms silent, a city of cold stone, more tomb than sanctuary. You step through the gate, its iron hinges stiff and coated with ice, and the streets unfold. Before you narrow lanes paved with cobblestones glazed in white, buildings huddled close as if pressing against one another for warmth. Windows are shuttered tight, glass rimmed with frost, doors barred against the wind that slips through every crack. The air is thick with the smell of smoke from weak hearths and the faint metallic tang of ice. Few people stir. Those who do move slowly, cloaks pulled tightly, eyes hollow, faces pale. Their footsteps echo strangely against the stones, the sound carrying farther than it should in the frozen stillness. You wander deeper, boots slipping slightly on the glazed streets, and come to the market square. Its stalls stand empty, canvas stiff with frost, wooden beams bowed under the weight of snow. A fountain in the center, once bubbling with water, is locked solid, the ice forming strange shapes where liquid once fell. The silence here is heavier than in the countryside, for it is the silence of absence of voices, of trade, of life. The city's heart has slowed, its pulse muted, its stone walls trapping as much cold as they repel. At the edge of the square, a small group gathers, their breath rising in thin clouds, hands outstretched toward a barrel fire that burns weakly, the wood inside nearly gone. They do not speak much, only glance at one another, offering faint nods. The silence between them is louder than any conversation. You approach, feeling the heat on your frozen fingers, but it lasts only for a moment before the cold seeps back in. The fire eats too fast, as if the frost itself demands repayment for each ember that glows. You glance upward, toward the spires and steeples piercing the heavy sky. Bells hang in their towers, locked in ice, silent as stone. Even faith seems muted here, its voice frozen, its call swallowed by the cold. Snow drifts down from the rooflines, soft but relentless, coating the already muted city in another layer of stillness. You walk on, each step echoing in the quiet streets, passing shuttered inns, abandoned carts, and alleys filled with snow that no hand has cleared. The city of cold stone offers no comfort, only the illusion of shelter. Its walls may stand firm against the wind, its buildings may crowd together as though resisting the frost, but within them, hunger, silence, and the bitter chill of despair persist. You pause at the far end of the street, glancing back at the frozen towers and shuttered homes, and realize that the city, like the countryside, endures not through abundance or warmth, but through sheer endurance. It is a place of survival carved into stone, where every breath taken in the frigid air is itself an act of defiance against the winter that seeks to claim all. You step into the city square as the pale sun struggles behind heavy clouds, its weak light swallowed almost instantly by the frost-hardened air. The cobblestones beneath your boots are slick with ice, and your breath rises in a cloud that lingers for only a heartbeat before vanishing. Around you, the silence of the city feels strained, filled with an unease that hangs as heavily as the snow clinging to rooftops. And then you hear it a murmur first, low and uncertain, like the rustle of branches in a windless forest. Soon it grows louder, sharper, until it swells into shouts that echo off the cold stone walls. The bread riots have begun. You push closer, your boots crunching over the ice, and see the crowd gathered in front of the market hall. Faces are gaunt, eyes hollow with hunger, cloaks wrapped tightly against the bitter wind. Mothers clutch offspring to their sides, their small hands reaching out desperately. Fathers stand rigid, fists clenched, voices raised in demand. A cart has been overturned, its empty baskets strewn across the frozen ground, and the people surge forward, crying out for bread that is no longer there. The air itself trembles with desperation, a sound more piercing than the howl of wolves. The soldiers stand at the edge of the square, their armor rimmed with frost, muskets heavy in their gloved hands. They do not shout, only watch. their eyes darting from one part of the crowd to another, weighing the danger, measuring the desperation. The cold has muted even their authority, their voices swallowed by the storm of human need. One man shouts of injustice, his words carried on a cloud of breath, and others take up the cry, their voices rising together in a chorus of fury. The frost cannot silence this hunger has sharpened tongues, stiffened spines, and turned quiet endurance into loud demand. You feel yourself pulled into the swell of bodies, the press of shoulders and cloaks against your own. The air smells of smoke and sweat, of desperation made flesh. Someone strikes the shutter of the market hall with a staff, the wood cracking against the frozen frame, and the sound ignites the crowd further. Shouts rise to a roar, fists pound against doors, boots slam against stone. The frozen silence of the city shatters in an instant, replaced by the sound of human voices desperate for survival. And then, just as quickly, the soldiers move. Their muskets lift, their boots scrape against the ice, their voices cut through the air at last. The crowd falters but does not scatter. Hunger anchors them as firmly as frost. For a moment, there is only stillness, broken by the sound of breathing, by the sharp crack of frost beneath shifting boots. Then the first musket fires, the sound like thunder against the stone walls, and the cries of hunger transform into screams. People scatter, slipping on the ice, clutching at one another, trying to escape the violence that falls upon them as mercilessly as the cold. You retreat to the edge of the square, heart pounding, breath rising in sharp bursts. The riot disperses, leaving behind broken baskets, scraps of cloth, and streaks of blood upon the snow. The soldiers stand silent once more, their eyes hard, their breath misting in the bitter air. The market doors remain closed, the loaves of bread gone long before the crowd had gathered. And as you turn back toward the frozen streets, you realize the frost has claimed more than crops and rivers. It has consumed voices, hope, and even the fragile bonds between neighbor and stranger. The bread riots in the frost are not only about food, they are the sound of hunger breaking open the silence, and the silence swallowing it again. You sit at the small table by the hearth, the fire behind you little more than a glow of embers. The air in the cabin is sharp, curling into your lungs with every breath, stinging as though each inhale carries fragments of ice. A sheet of paper lies before you, its surface slightly curled from the damp air, and a quill rests in your stiff fingers. The ink, sluggish from the cold, clings heavily to the nib. Writing in such weather feels like carving words into stone, every letter a weight, every sentence a labor. And yet you write, because the silence of hunger demands a voice, even if it is only to a page. The first words come haltingly. We are not well. The ink blots as your hand trembles, the nib catching against the paper. You pause, staring at the phrase, aware of how insufficient it is. How can a line of ink capture the sound of offspring crying through the night, their small voices thin with hunger? How can it show the sight of fields locked in ice, livestock thin and silent in the barn, neighbors at your door with eyes wide and hollow? The page cannot hold the frost creeping across your windows, or the way every breath feels like a bargain struck with the cold. Still, you continue. You write of the bread riots in the city, of the market stalls stripped bare, of soldiers with frost clinging to their armor, and muskets raised against a crowd of empty hands. You describe the silence of the church bells, frozen in their towers, and the streets that echo not with voices, but with the brittle sound of boots over ice. Each sentence scratches across the page, and each word carries with it the weight of despair. You do not know if the letter will ever reach its destination. The roads are long, the rivers frozen, the couriers as hungry as those they serve. Still, the act of writing feels necessary, as if despair left unspoken might consume you entirely. The quill slips in your numb fingers, and a blot spreads across the paper like a shadow. You steady your hand and press on, writing of your fear that spring may never come, that the frost will stretch forever, swallowing hope along with crops and cattle. You write of the neighbors huddled in their homes, of the weak fires that die too quickly, of the silence in the barns where once there had been sound. And finally, you write of faith, that fragile ember you cling to, as brittle as the firewood stacked too thin in the corner. You confess that even faith feels muted under the weight of hunger, though you do not stop your hand from moving across the page. When at last the letter is finished, you fold it carefully, the crack of the stiff paper sharp in the quiet room. You tie it with string, though you do not know if there will be anyone left to carry it, or anyone left to read it. Still, you place it near the door, alongside the few others you have written, each one a voice cast into the frozen void. The cabin settles around you, timbers creaking, wind pressing against the shutters, and the embers in the hearth pulse faintly. Letters of despair, they may never be read, but they remain. Fragile records of endurance, proof that even in the heart of the great frost, someone lived, someone wrote, someone endured long enough to put despair into words. You wake to the same grey sky you saw yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. The frost clings thick on the windows, tracing jagged veins across the glass, and the hearth has burned down to ash. When you stir from under the quilt, the air inside the cabin bites at your skin like teeth, so sharp you catch your breath before moving again. Outside, the wind moans against the shutters, a sound you have heard every morning for what feels like an eternity. January stretches on, heavy and unyielding, and with each sunrise you wonder if the month will ever release its grip. You step outside, boots cracking against the crusted snow, the yard stiff and silent beneath your feet. The animals are sluggish, their breaths rising in weak plumes, their bodies thin from too little feed. You scatter what remains of the grain, each handful more precious than coin, and watch as they nose at it listlessly, hunger too great to allow complaint. The barn, once a place of noise and movement, remains muted, filled with quiet shapes pressing together for warmth. The silence is more than stillness, it is exhaustion, a soundless endurance that mirrors the days themselves. The village paths are nearly erased, buried beneath drifts that rise higher with each storm. Houses huddle against one another, their chimneys releasing only thin threads of smoke, too little fuel to keep fires burning strong. Neighbors pass by, wrapped in cloaks, their faces hidden, their eyes hollow. They nod in greeting but do not stop. Words cost energy, and energy is too scarce to waste. Even the church stands silent, its bells locked in ice, its doors heavy with frost. January weighs on every soul, pressing them into quiet submission beneath the endless cold. You make your way to the well, the rope stiff with ice, the bucket refusing to move until you chip away the frozen rim. Your hands sting as you work, the cold cutting through the gloves, making your joints ache as if they were carved from stone. At last, the bucket yields, bringing up water thick with shards of ice, sharp enough to slice skin if handled carelessly. You carry it home, each step heavy, boots slipping on the uneven path, your breath curling in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Back in the cabin, the day crawls forward. You coax the fire to life, splitting logs stiff with frost, watching the flames flare briefly before sinking low again. You sip thin broth, a bitter mix of roots and scraps, and it warms your stomach only for a moment before hunger returns, insistent and sharp. Time feels suspended, measured not in hours but in the length of a candle, in the number of logs consumed by the fire, in the distance between each meager meal. Night falls too quickly, and yet the day has felt endless, the grey light stretching on without change. You lie beneath the quilts again, listening to the wind hiss at the shutters, the frost creep across the windows, the quiet breathing of those beside you. January lingers outside, unmoving, unyielding, as though the calendar itself has frozen in place. You close your eyes and whisper a silent hope for February, though the thought feels fragile, nearly foolish. For now, you remain inside a January that will not end, where each day is indistinguishable from the last, and survival itself feels like an act of defiance against time as much as against the cold. You awaken to a sharp ache in your fingers. a pain that does not fade when you pull them from beneath the quilt. The air inside the cabin is brittle, every breath rising in pale mist, every surface edged with frost. You flex your hands, but the joints resist, stiff as if carved from wood. The tips are pale, numb at first, then stinging with a burn that feels alive. You have seen this before, in neighbors and kin frostbitten hands, the mark of a winter that spares nothing. You sit by the hearth and coax the fire back to life, striking flint until a fragile spark leaps into the tinder. The flames flare, then shrink, eating wood hungrily, consuming faster than you can feed it. You hold your hands close, palms open, waiting for warmth to seep into the skin. At first, there is nothing, no comfort, no thaw, only emptiness. Then, slowly, sensation returns, but it is not relief, it is fire of another kind, a sharp, stabbing pain that drives tears to your eyes. The skin reddens, then darkens, and you know that some damage will linger long after the frost has gone. Outside, the morning is grey, the snow pressed hard against the cabin walls, the wind tugging at the roof. You step into the yard, careful, your gloves stiff and cracked from use. The bucket for water lies overturned, its rim encased in ice, and lifting it demands effort your hands cannot easily give. Your fingers slip against the wood, clumsy, refusing to close around it. You curse under your breath, then try again, using your forearms, your body, anything to do what once required only the strength of your grip. The cold watches, patient, unrelenting, content to claim one finger, one hand, one life at a time. At the barn, the animals stir faintly, their breaths clouding the air. You scatter feed with awkward motions, hands trembling, grain spilling too quickly, wasted on the frozen ground. The goats nose at your gloves, sensing weakness, but you push them gently away, unwilling to let them take from your meager store. A cow shifts in her stall, her hide dull, her eyes heavy, and you reach out to stroke her side. Your fingers, stiff and half-numb, barely register the touch. Yet you know the warmth of her body against your palm is more than comfort, it is proof that life endures. You return to the cabin, hands throbbing, each knuckle swollen, each fingertip burning as though aflame. You sit by the fire again, wrapping them in cloth, pressing them close to your chest. Neighbors have spoken of worse blackened skin, fingertips lost to the frost, hands so ruined they can no longer work. You whisper a prayer that yours will mend, though the winter is not finished with you yet. The pain is sharp, but the fear is sharper, that tomorrow the hands you depend on may fail, leaving you defenseless against hunger and cold. As the day fades into another long night, you watch your fingers in the dim firelight, swollen and tender, fragile as the flame itself. Frostbitten hands, they are not merely wounds of the flesh, but marks of survival written in pain, reminders of the cost demanded by a January that will not end. You pull the quilt close, pressing your hands beneath it, and know that every task tomorrow will be slower, every effort heavier, but still necessary. For as long as your hands can move, as long as they can grip even weakly, you will endure the frost that seeks to still them forever. You push open the cabin door with care, and the air that greets you is no different from outside. The cold presses in through the walls, through the cracks in the shutters, through every gap in the floorboards. It is sharp, unyielding, heavy as iron. Inside, the fire has burned too low, a few embers glowing faintly but not enough to banish the frost creeping across the corners of the room. This is not a place of healing, it is a sick room without warmth, a chamber where the ill lie beneath quilts that cannot protect them, their breath clouding in the bitter air. You step closer to the cot where the patient lies, face pale, lips tinged with blue. Each breath rattles faintly in the chest, thin and shallow, as if the air itself resists entering fragile lungs. A damp cloth rests against the forehead, but the water in its fibers has stiffened into icy threads. You lift it, fingers trembling, and dip it into the basin beside the bed. Even the water here has frozen along its edges, sharp shards clinging to the rim, biting your skin as you wring it out. You press the cloth back onto the forehead, and the patient stirs slightly, eyes fluttering open with the dull glaze of fever. The room carries the sharp scent of sickness mixed with smoke and damp wood. The quilt, pulled high around the patient's shoulders, is stiff with frost along its hem. Every breath you take feels like inhaling glass, the air biting your throat and settling heavy in your chest. You whisper softly, words of comfort, though the voice sounds weak even to your own ears. In this cold, even hope is brittle. Medicine is scarce, herbs long buried under snow, roots frozen into soil too hard to dig. The only remedy you can offer is presence, the warmth of your body near theirs, the reassurance that they are not alone in this frozen vigil. Outside, the wind howls against the cabin, rattling the shutters with a fury that makes the timbers groan. Snow pushes in through the cracks, thin streams of white gathering along the floor. The frost has painted the windows in jagged patterns, as if the season itself seeks to remind you that it governs here, that no flame or cloth can withstand its rule. You add a log to the fire, listening to it hiss and snap, the flames licking upward greedily. For a moment, a weak glow fills the room, but the warmth is thin, swallowed almost instantly by the endless cold. The patient coughs, a hollow sound, weak and rasping. You steady them, lifting a cup of broth to their lips, though the liquid is lukewarm at best, the fire too feeble to keep it hot. They swallow slowly, each sip a struggle, and sink back into the pillow with eyes half closed. You pull the quilt higher, tucking it tight around their shoulders, though you know it is not enough. The sick room without warmth is a cruel irony, a place meant to heal, yet colder than the world outside, stripped of comfort by a winter that takes without mercy. You remain by the bedside, holding a fragile hand in yours, feeling its faint tremor against your palm. The fire flickers, the wind howls, the frost creeps deeper across the walls. And still you sit, refusing to yield, breathing into the silence, sharing what little warmth you possess. For in this room, where the frost claims everything, endurance itself becomes the only medicine left. The village gathers in silence, boots crunching over snow, cloaks drawn tight against the biting wind. A pale sun lingers above, but it offers no warmth, only a thin light that falls across faces carved with grief and exhaustion. At the center of the procession lies the coffin, plain and rough-hewn, carried slowly by neighbors whose breaths rise in white clouds. Each step forward is careful, for the path is treacherous, coated with ice that threatens to send them sliding. Even in mourning, the frost demands caution. The ground where the grave should be dug is locked fast, hard as stone. Men with shovels stand ready, their tools clutched in raw, stiffened hands. They strike the earth, and the sound rings out sharp, like iron against iron, echoing through the still fields. The frozen soil resists them, splintering their efforts, each thrust yielding only a handful of frost-crusted dirt. They pause often, leaning on the handles, their chests heaving, their breath misting thick in the grey air. The work is slow, cruel, and the coffin waits, resting upon snow while the mourners stand in hushed patience. Children huddle against mothers, eyes wide, their small hands clutching the hems of skirts. Fathers stand rigid, shoulders bent against the wind, their expressions heavy with more than grief, it is weariness, the same tired resolve that has carried them through endless days of hunger and frost. The priest steps forward, his voice trembling in the cold, each word of prayer carried weakly by the wind. The syllables float upward, vanishing almost instantly, as though even heaven is muted by the winter's dominion. At last, the ground yields enough to cradle the coffin. The men set it down gently, the wood thudding softly against the frozen soil. The mourners bow their heads, tears freezing upon cheeks almost as soon as they fall. There are no songs, no long speeches, only the faint murmur of prayers and the shuffle of boots as each person steps forward to scatter a handful of snow-dusted earth into the pit. The clumps strike the wood with hollow taps, sharp against the silence. The wind rises suddenly, sweeping across the field, lifting snow into the air like ashes. Cloaks whip and flap, and the mourners draw closer, bodies pressed against one another for warmth and solidarity. You feel the sting of frost on your skin, but also the weight of shared sorrow. The frost has claimed livestock, crops, health, and now it claims life itself. Yet even here, in the funeral on frozen ground, the community gathers, bound by the need to bear witness, to resist despair by standing together. When the coffin is covered, the mourners turn back toward the village, footsteps dragging, faces pale. The grave stands quiet behind them, a mound of snow marking the final rest. The shovels are left leaning against the earth, their blades rimmed with frost, their handles worn from desperate use. You linger for a moment, staring at the frozen ground, listening to the wind whisper across it. The silence is heavy, yet it carries within it the echo of resolve. For though the frost hardens the soil, and though it steals life, it cannot sever the bond of those who remain. The funeral on frozen ground is not only farewell, it is endurance, the promise that even in grief, life must continue beneath the weight of the great frost. You wake to a morning without sound. The frost clings thick upon the windows, blurring the world beyond, and the hearth behind you is nothing but a bed of grey ash. You rise slowly, wrapping your cloak tightly, and step outside into a village hushed beneath the weight of the great frost. The snow crunches beneath your boots, brittle and sharp, but even that sound feels muted, swallowed by the cold air. Where once there had been bells calling the faithful, voices echoing through the square, and laughter carried over fields, there is now only stillness. It is the tolling of silence, a sound heavier than any bell, a voice louder than any cry. You walk along the narrow lane, past houses with shutters closed, smoke curling faintly from their chimneys. The air smells of damp wood and faint smoke, tinged with the metallic edge of ice. Doors creak open as neighbors glance out, their faces pale, eyes hollow. They do not greet you, only watch, then slip back inside. The silence has settled over them too, pressing into their walls, muffling their speech, turning their grief and hunger into a quiet endurance. You realize that sound itself has become a luxury, something rationed like food, something scarce as warmth. You pass the church, its tower rising dark and still against the grey sky. The bells within, once proud and sonorous, are locked fast in ice, their ropes frozen stiff. No hand can draw forth their voices, and so the village measures time not by their toll, but by the slow guttering of candles, the burning down of logs, the distant turning of days that all feel the same. Even funerals are hushed now, words spoken in whispers, prayers swallowed by the frost before they can rise. Death moves quietly from cabin to cabin, leaving only silence in its wake. In the market square, the stalls stand empty, their wooden frames rimmed with frost. A few figures move among them, heads bowed, hands buried deep in cloaks, their boots shuffling through the snow. No bargaining voices rise, no laughter rings out, no children dart between stalls. Instead, the silence tolls louder than any marketplace cry, echoing in the hollowness of empty baskets and the barren stone fountain at the center, frozen midstream. The absence of life hums like a bell struck but never heard. You stop in the middle of the square and close your eyes, listening. At first there is nothing, only the ringing in your ears, the sound of your own breath pushing into the cold. But then you realize the silence itself has shape, it has weight. It tolls like a bell across the village, through the fields, into the barns, and out over the frozen rivers. It binds the people together not by sound, but by absence, by the heavy recognition that all endure the same muting hand of frost. When you return to your cabin, the quiet follows, pressing through the door, settling into the rafters, curling into the corners like smoke. You stir the embers, coaxing a faint flame, and listen as the logs crack and pop, the only sound defiant enough to break the hush. Yet even that fades quickly, leaving you with the tolling of silence once more, and you realize that silence, though heavy, is not only loss, it is survival. It is the voice of endurance, the mark of lives carried forward without fanfare, without song, without bells, but still carried. In this frozen season, Silence tolls louder than sound, and the village continues, fragile but unbroken beneath its weight. The frost has pressed so deep into the village that every step feels like a struggle against stone. The wind cuts through cloaks and shawls, pulling at the seams of every cabin, while hunger gnaws sharper than the cold itself. Bread has long since vanished from the market stalls, and even the smallest crumb has become precious. Yet in the midst of this merciless winter, neighbors still gather in doorways, eyes downcast, hands trembling, to share what little remains. It is not abundance that binds them together now, it is the sharing of crusts, small and brittle, but heavy with meaning. You wake to the sound of a soft knock at your door. The fire has burned too low, leaving the air in the cabin sharp and biting, and your stomach aches with emptiness. When you open the door, a neighbor stands there, shawl drawn tight around her thin shoulders. In her hand is a cloth bundle, carefully wrapped, its edges damp with frost. She opens it to reveal a crust of bread, hard and cracked, barely large enough to fill a hand. Yet she offers it without hesitation, her eyes weary but resolute. You take it gently, your fingers brushing hers, and feel the quiet strength in the gesture. Around the village, similar acts unfold. Families bring what scraps they have: a crust softened in broth, a sliver of salted meat, a handful of roots pulled from beneath the frozen ground. They gather in small groups, huddled near the weakest of fires, passing these meager offerings back and forth. The bread is chewed slowly, each bite savored, as if stretching it across minutes might stretch it across days. No one eats enough to satisfy the ache of hunger, but each receives something, and that something is enough to remind them that they are not alone. Children, too, clutch at the crumbs, their small fingers stiff from cold. Mothers break pieces carefully, dividing evenly, their hands trembling as they do. Fathers watch quietly, hollow-eyed, yet soften when they see offspring chewing, no matter how little there is. The act of sharing carries warmth that no hearth can provide, a fire of its own that flickers inside the chest. For in a world where the frost claims everything, fields, rivers, even the sound of church bells, the one thing it cannot steal is the stubborn impulse to give. The snow drifts higher against the cabin walls, the sky remains heavy with grey, and the fields beyond lie silent and dead. Yet inside these fragile homes, a ritual of endurance continues. Crusts are shared not as meals, but as promises, promises that neighbors will not let one another starve in silence, promises that even in the harshest winter, humanity still breathes. You bite into the crust given to you, the taste dry and sharp, but it settles in your stomach with unexpected weight. It is not enough to end hunger, but enough to quiet despair. As night falls, the wind howls once more through the streets, rattling shutters and scouring the fields. Families settle close together under quilts, bellies far from full, but hearts steadied by the memory of hands extended, crusts divided, lives shared. The frost may command the land, but the sharing of crusts commands the spirit, binding the village in a fragile but unbreakable thread of endurance. The night presses heavy upon the village, darker than ink, the sky smothered by low clouds that hide even the pale glimmer of stars. The wind sweeps through the streets like a restless spirit, rattling shutters and piling snow against every door. Yet in the midst of this frozen stillness, a faint glow shines through the frost, a candle set in a window, its flame fragile but steady, flickering against the weight of the dark. You notice it as you step outside, boots crunching on the hard crust of snow, breath curling upward like pale smoke. The air is sharp, biting at your lungs, but your eyes fix on that glow. It trembles within its glass, light bending through frost-laced panes, and though it is no larger than the flame of a match, it feels as if it holds back the entire night. The cabin behind the window is no warmer than your own, its hearth struggling against the frost, its shelves nearly bare. Yet someone has chosen to burn a candle there, not for heat, but for hope. You walk closer, listening as the village sleeps beneath the frost. Most homes are shuttered tight, their windows dark, conserving every ounce of oil, every scrap of wax. Silence reigns, broken only by the groan of trees weighed down with ice and the distant call of a wolf beyond the fields. But here, before this one window, the world changes. The candle's glow spills faintly onto the snow, casting a golden patch against the pale white, fragile as breath yet warm enough to stir something in your chest. Inside, you glimpse a figure bent close to the flame, hands folded, lips moving in prayer. The candle is not only light, it is a message, an offering, a signal to all who pass that despair has not claimed this house. Neighbors who see it will know, here, at least, hope still burns. The sick may look to it, the hungry may take comfort from it, and the weary may be reminded that the frost cannot smother every flame. In a winter where silence tolls louder than bells, a single candle is as bold as a shout. You linger for a moment, pulling your cloak tighter, letting the cold press against your body while your eyes rest on the glow. You think of your own cabin, the hearth where embers fade too quickly, the children shivering under quilts, the letters of despair written with trembling hands. You think of neighbors who have given their last crusts, of funerals held on frozen ground, of barns where silence has swallowed every familiar sound. Against such weight, what can a candle be? And yet, watching it flicker, you realize it is enough. When you return home, you light your own candle, placing it carefully on the windowsill. The flame quivers in the draught, then steadies, casting golden circles across the frost on the glass. You sit by it, hands stretched toward its small warmth, and feel the silence ease. Outside, the wind still howls, the frost still claims the earth, but in the dark of the great frost, the village now holds not one candle, but two. And perhaps tomorrow there will be more, each light a defiance against despair, each flame a promise that though the night is long, it will not last forever. The road stretches before you, no longer the muddy track of summer, nor the rutted lane of autumn, but a ribbon of ice, hard and glittering beneath a pale grey sky. The frost has claimed it fully, smoothing over every stone and filling every hollow until it gleams like glass. Wagons that once sank into mud now glide uneasily across its frozen surface, wheels groaning, axles creaking, their progress slow and dangerous. What was once a path between villages has become a frozen road to distant lands, a corridor of silence stretching farther than the eye can see. You set out carefully, boots crunching against the icy crust, breath clouding in front of your face. Each step must be measured, for the frost hides treachery, cracks in the ice, patches slick as polished stone, ridges that catch and trip. Horses snort clouds of steam, their hooves striking sparks against the frozen ground, their bodies lean from too little feed. Drivers hunch over reins, eyes narrowed against the wind, their faces etched with hunger and determination. They carry goods not of abundance but of survival, logs to burn, roots to boil, scraps of cloth to patch worn cloaks. The road, though perilous, is the only tether between the scattered souls enduring this winter. The countryside lies silent on either side, fields stretch flat and white, furrows buried beneath drifts of snow, hedgerows bowed under the weight of frost. Forests loom dark in the distance, their branches coated in ice that glitters faintly whenever the sun peeks through the clouds. Villages pass in hushed sequence, cabins crouched low against the wind, smoke rising weakly from their chimneys. Doors creak open as you pass, faces peering out, eyes watchful, as if searching for news, for proof that beyond their walls others still endure. You pause at a frozen river, where the road crosses on a sheet of ice thick enough to bear weight. Once ferries rode here, their oars cutting through dark water, but now the river lies still, sealed in silence. Wagons roll carefully across, wheels groaning, horses stamping nervously at the sound of ice cracking faintly beneath. Some walk quickly, eager to escape the danger, others linger, marveling at how the river itself has become a road, transformed by frost into a bridge that carries them farther than before. The frozen road is both enemy and ally, opening paths, yet demanding respect with every step. Night falls early, and travelers gather where the road widens, lighting small fires shielded by stones or broken carts. The flames flicker weakly against the vast dark, the sound of crackling wood swallowed quickly by the wind. Bread is broken into crusts, broth passed in bowls, hands warmed for a few moments before the fires die down again. The road is not only a path, it is a place of meeting, of stories shared in whispers, of fragile comfort in the company of strangers bound together by the same relentless frost. As you press onward, boots aching, cloak stiff with ice, the road narrows again, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It offers no guarantee of refuge, no promise of plenty, only the possibility of reaching another village, another fire, another hand willing to share a crust. Yet in this season, that is enough. The frozen road to distant lands is not a road of escape, it is a road of endurance, carved in ice, carrying those who walk it through silence, through hunger, and into the fragile hope of survival. The river that once sang with rushing water now lies still, locked beneath a sheet of ice so thick it seems to defy belief. In summers past, you watched barges drift lazily along its currents, ferrymen guiding their loads with long poles, the water glinting gold beneath the Sunday. But now, in the grip of this merciless winter, the river has transformed into something else entirely. It has become a road, a vast ribbon of frozen glass stretching across the land, carrying not boats, but wagons, hooves, and desperate footsteps. You step carefully onto its surface, boots crunching faintly over the dusting of snow that hides patches slick as polished stone. Beneath your feet lies water that once flowed deep and swift, now silent, sealed away by the frost. Wagons creak as they roll across, their wheels groaning, their loads piled high with firewood, roots, and salted meat, small fortunes in a season when every scrap is precious. Horses strain against their harnesses, nostrils flaring with mist, hooves striking sparks where iron meets ice. Their drivers hunch low, cloaks pulled tight, urging them forward with quiet words. The river that once divided now unites, linking distant villages across its frozen spine. The air carries an eerie stillness as you walk alongside the procession. No water laps at the banks, no birds skim the surface. Instead, the only sounds are the crunch of boots, the groan of wagons, the occasional sharp crack echoing through the ice. Each noise draws quick glances, breaths held, as travelers wait for reassurance that the ice will hold. The frost is thick enough to carry entire carts and herds, but still the thought lingers that beneath this fragile surface lies a grave of frozen water, ready to claim the careless or the unlucky. You pause near the center of the river, looking down where the ice is clear, and see bubbles trapped in layers of blue. They seem like ghosts of the river's former life, reminders of currents that once rushed with power but are now muted by silence. The sight chills you more than the wind, a reminder that this road of ice is temporary, a gift and a threat in equal measure. For now it carries wagons safely, but one day, when the thaw comes, it will reclaim its voice and perhaps those who trust it too long. Villagers travel in clusters, huddled close as they move across the wide, frozen plain. Some carry firewood lashed to sleds, others barrels of water hacked from wells, others still leading gaunt animals whose hooves slip uncertainly on the ice. At night, fires are kindled at the river's edge, flames flickering faintly, their glow mirrored across the frozen surface. People sit close, chewing thin crusts, whispering prayers, sharing stories of hardship and survival. The river has become not only a road but a gathering place, a stage where the frost has rewritten the rules of travel and life alike. As you step back onto the far bank, the wagons still creak behind you, pressing onward into the pale grey horizon. You look once more at the river, stretched, silent and vast, and feel a mix of awe and unease. The river that carried wagons is proof of both endurance and danger, a reminder that the great frost reshapes the world in ways both wondrous and terrible. And though it offers passage now, its silence is a warning. All things will shift again, when ice loosens, when water flows, when the road beneath your boots becomes a current that will not wait for the weary. You wake one morning to a sound that feels unfamiliar, almost impossible after so many endless weeks of silence. It is faint at first, little more than a trickle, a dripping that punctures the stillness like the hesitant notes of a forgotten song. You sit up beneath your quilt, listening, unsure if your ears have deceived you. Then you hear it again. Water, moving, alive, breaking free from the grip of ice. The frost still clings thick to the windows. The air inside the cabin is sharp and cold, but beyond the walls there lingers something different, something new, the whisper of thaw. You step outside, boots crunching against the brittle crust of snow, and breathe in air that feels almost softened, as though the bite has dulled just slightly. The sky above is still grey, yet the clouds seem thinner, weaker, and for the first time in months, the sun's pale light touches your face with something more than indifference. Along the roofline of your cabin, icicles have begun to drip, each drop of water catching the light before falling into the snow below. The sound is steady, delicate, and strange, an orchestra of patience that no silence can fully smother. The village stirs cautiously to the same sound. Doors open, neighbors peering out, their faces etched with disbelief. Children point toward the eaves where water falls in slow, shining beads, their small voices lifting into the air with wonder. The ground is still hard, the field still buried, but the air carries with it a subtle shift. It is not warmth, not yet, but the promise of it. And though it is faint, fragile, it is enough to rouse a flicker of hope in hearts beaten down by endless frost. You walk toward the river, cautious, your breath curling in the chill. Its surface remains frozen, a wide white plain where wagons have passed, yet at the edges you hear it, a gurgle, a faint crackle where water pushes against its prison. The ice creaks beneath its own weight, groaning like timbers under strain, as though the river itself is restless, impatient to reclaim its voice. You kneel by the bank, brush away snow with stiffened gloves, and watch as a thin stream trickles through a crack, dark against the pale. The sight holds you, humbles you, for it is proof that the frost does not last forever, that even the coldest winter cannot silence water's will to move. By evening, the air smells different. The smoke from chimneys rises more freely, the damp scent of melting ice mingling with wood and ash. Inside your cabin, the fire burns as it always has, but the walls seem less eager to swallow its warmth. You break bread, thin and hard, and though it is still meager, you chew it with a quiet awareness that soon the earth may soften, soon the ground may yield again to seed and hand. Night falls, and you lie beneath the quilt, listening not to silence, but to the steady dripping outside your window. Each drop is a promise, each sound a whisper that the world is shifting. The thaw has not yet come in full, but its voice carries through the dark, reminding you that no winter, however cruel, endures forever. The whisper of thaw is small, but it is enough to steady your breath, enough to remind you that survival is not only endurance, but also faith in change. You wake to a morning that feels different, though the air is still sharp, and your breath still curls into the cabin like smoke. When you step outside, the snow crunches beneath your boots as always, yet something about the sound has changed, less brittle, more heavy, as if the ground below has begun to stir. The sun, pale though it remains, presses faintly warmer through the thinning clouds, and for the first time in months, the frost seems to loosen its grip. You walk slowly toward the fields, each step sinking deeper than before, and when you kneel to brush aside the crust of snow, you find it, a patch of earth, dark and wet, the first mud beneath the snow. It clings to your gloves, thick and cold, but it carries with it the scent of lifelong, hidden, rich, damp soil that has waited patiently through the long winter silence. The sight of it strikes you with a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because it means the frost is finally breaking. Fear because the earth revealed is weak, sodden, and barren, unable yet to feed or yield. Still, it is change, and after months of unbroken white, change feels like hope. The village stirs with the same discovery. Neighbors leave their cabins, voices hushed but urgent, pointing toward doorsteps where snow has begun to melt, revealing stone, straw, and dirt. Children crouch down, poking curious fingers into the thawing patches, smearing their cheeks with mud as they laugh for the first time in many weeks. Their mothers watch with tired eyes, half smiling, though the hollowness of hunger still lingers in their faces. The men test the earth with boots and spades, striking it to see if it will yield, though most of it remains locked in ice. Still, the sound of dripping water from eaves and the soft squelch of mud underfoot break the silence that winter had made absolute. You return to the fields, staring at the long furrows buried under slush and snow. The work ahead is immense. Seeds must be found, land must be turned, animals coaxed back to strength. But for now, the earth itself has begun to open, and that is enough to steady your chest. You imagine rows of wheat swaying in summer wind, vegetables pushing up through soft soil, the river running free once more. The mud at your feet, though meager, carries those visions within it, a reminder that the frost cannot command the world forever. By evening, the air inside the cabin feels less sharp. The fire burns more steadily, the walls less eager to swallow the heat. You set your boots by the door, their soles heavy with clinging mud, and you smile faintly at the sight, for it is proof that the earth has not died, only slept. The smell of damp soil lingers faintly on your hands, sharper than the scent of wood smoke, and it fills you with a strange, quiet strength. As night falls, you lie beneath your quilt, listening to the steady drip of melting snow outside the window. The first mud beneath the snow is not yet a promise fulfilled, but it is a beginning. And in a winter that seemed endless, beginnings are the strongest fire of all. The frost has loosened its hold at last. You wake to air that no longer bites as sharply at your lungs, to mornings filled with the sound of dripping water and the creak of thawing timbers. The river, once a frozen road of ice, runs dark and restless again, carrying bits of broken ice downstream. Birds return hesitantly, their calls thin but hopeful, as though testing the silence winter left behind. The snow pulls back from the fields, revealing wide stretches of dark earth. And yet, as the village gathers at the edge of those fields, the truth becomes clear. Spring has arrived, but the seed bins are empty. You stand with neighbors, boots sinking into the soft mud, staring at the furrows carved into soil that is ready to yield. The ground smells rich, damp, and alive, but there is nothing to press into it. Last year's stores were eaten long ago, sacrificed to survive the merciless winter. The little that remained was ground into flour or boiled into thin gruel during the long nights. Hands that once tossed grain in wide arcs across the soil now hang heavy, empty. The earth waits, but the village cannot answer. Mothers clutch offspring by the shoulders, pointing to the fields, whispering of the wheat and rye that should be growing there. The children nod, though their eyes reveal little understanding. They know only the hunger still gnawing at their bellies. Fathers pace slowly along the ridges, glancing toward barns where livestock stand thin and weary, animals too weak to plow or carry loads. Tools lean against fences, rusting, their purpose stalled by absence. The silence is heavier than the cold ever was, for it is the silence of opportunity lost, of time slipping through hands that can do nothing to hold it. You kneel in the soil, pressing your palm against the damp furrow. It is ready, eager even, but no handful of seed falls into its care. You remember the days of plenty, sacks of grain piled high, seeds saved carefully from harvests, families gathering in fields to sow together, laughter mingling with the rhythm of work. Now those memories taste bitter. The frost did not only claim the past, it stole the future as well. Without seed, the season of growth will become another season of hunger, and the promise of spring is hollow. That night, the village gathers in the church. The candles burn low, their light flickering across hollow faces. Voices rise in quiet discussion. Some speak of traveling to distant towns, though the roads are long and dangerous. Others suggest planting whatever scraps remain, crumbs of barley, stray kernels of rye, though all know it will not be enough. The priest bows his head, murmuring prayers. But even the prayers feel thin, carried away too quickly by the draught seeping through the stone walls. You return home, lay your boots by the hearth, and sit in silence. The fire crackles faintly, its warmth fragile, its flame unsteady. On the table before you rests an empty bowl, clean but heavy with meaning. Outside, the thaw continues, water dripping from the roof, mud swallowing the last patches of snow. The world stirs, ready for renewal, but without seed, the fields remain bare, the barns remain empty, and the bellies of the village remain hollow. Spring without seeds, it is a crueler vision than winter itself. For winter carried suffering, but it was expected, endured. Spring was meant to be deliverance, and instead, it is another test. You close your eyes, listening to the soft drip of water in the eaves, and realize that survival will demand more than patience. It will demand faith, ingenuity, and endurance against a hunger that does not yield, not even to the turning of the seasons. You walk slowly through the churchyard, boots sinking into the soft ground where the frost has finally loosened its grip. The snow has melted away in patches, leaving the soil dark and heavy, streaked with water and scattered with bits of thawing straw. Everywhere you look, mounds rise from the earth, too many, too fresh, too close together. Wooden markers lean against one another, names carved hastily, some already smudged by dampness. The wind moves softly through the yard, carrying with it the faint smell of wet soil and smoke. This is where the cost of the great frost has been written, not in ledgers or letters, but in graves. You pause by the first row, reading the names scratched into rough boards with trembling hands. Families lie side by side, their markers no more than planks nailed together in haste. Some graves bear no names at all, only a cross etched into the wood, for hunger and frost claimed them before anyone could record who they were. Small mounds lie scattered among the larger ones, heartbreakingly shallow, covered only with thin quilts of earth, as if the ground itself had been reluctant to accept such fragile lives. The silence of the yard is thick, broken only by the caw of a crow circling overhead. The villagers come often, their cloaks pulled tight, their faces pale and drawn. They kneel by the markers, laying sprigs of dried herbs, crusts of bread, or scraps of cloth offerings that hold more meaning than value. A mother whispers prayers over a grave too small, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she presses her fingers into the wet earth. An old man stands at another, hat in hand, his shoulders bent with both grief and exhaustion. He lingers long after others have gone, staring at the marker as if willing the name carved into it to rise from the soil. You walk on, listening to the sounds of water dripping from the eaves of the church, the faint squelch of mud beneath your boots, the quiet sobs of neighbors mourning. The graves stretch farther than you expect, spilling out past the churchyard fence, pushing against the edges of fields where once crops grew. Each mound is a ledger of loss, each name a tally of what the frost has taken. You realize with a heavy heart that the winter has not just taken lives, it has thinned families, broken households, silenced voices that once filled the village square with laughter, prayer, or song. At the far end of the yard, you kneel at an unmarked mound, pressing your hand against the soil. The earth is damp, clinging to your glove, and it feels heavy with sorrow. You close your eyes and whisper your own prayer, not loud, not long, but steady. You know the frost will pass eventually, that spring will soften the earth and the sun will return. But the cost will remain here, written in graves, in markers that lean and splinter, in names that fade, in silences that echo through empty cabins. As you rise to leave, the wind stirs again, carrying with it the faint sound of the village hammers, striking wood, voices murmuring, fires crackling. Life endures, stubborn and quiet, pushing forward even in the shadow of loss. Yet the churchyard lingers behind you, each mound a reminder that survival is never without price. The great frost will be remembered not only in the silence of barns and the hunger of bellies, but in this soil, heavy with sorrow, where the true cost is written in graves. You rise to another grey morning, the air sharp and unyielding, though softer now than the cruel bite of deep winter. The frost still lingers across rooftops and fences, but the sun has begun to break through, pale and tentative, its rays glinting against the slow melt. You wrap your cloak tighter and step outside, boots sinking into mud where snow has thinned. The village stirs cautiously around you, neighbors venturing from their cabins with hollow faces and wary eyes. The great frost is loosening, but its lessons remain, etched into every gesture, every word, every silence. You see it first in the children. Their laughter, once unbroken, has grown quieter, tempered by hunger and cold. They know now what it means to go without, what it feels like to shiver under quilts too thin, what it means to chew on crusts until jaws ache. They play still, chasing each other in the slush, but their games carry an edge of endurance, small bodies hardened by a season that spared no one. The lesson is written in their faces that even the youngest have learned to measure joy against survival. You see it in the barns, too. Where once animals bawled and clucked and stamped, there is now quiet order. Fewer livestock remain, their numbers halved by hunger and cold, but those that survived are tended with reverence. Farmers lean close, hands careful, eyes sharp. They know now the fragility of life, the delicate balance between plenty and loss. Each egg, each drop of milk, each strip of meat is not taken for granted but treated as treasure. The frost has taught them to weigh value not by abundance, but by scarcity, by what was nearly lost. You walk through the fields, boots heavy with mud, and run your hand across the damp soil. It is softening, pliant, preparing to yield again. But you remember how it looked beneath snow, silent and lifeless, how seed bins stood empty when the thaw first began. You know now that spring does not promise survival, it only offers a chance, fragile and fleeting. The lesson of the fields is patience, vigilance, and humility before a world that answers not to human need but to its own seasons. In the village square, neighbors gather around weak fires, sharing not food, there is still too little of that but words. Stories of those lost are spoken in hushed voices, names repeated so they will not fade. Plans for planting are whispered, ideas for barter exchanged. There is no boasting, no laughter as before, only quiet determination. The frost has taught them that survival is not solitary, it is communal, a thread woven from many hands. To share crusts, to share warmth, to share labor, that is the lesson that has carried them through the silence. As evening falls, you return to your cabin, light a candle in the window, and sit by the hearth. The fire crackles weakly, but you feel its warmth more deeply now, understanding how fragile and precious it is. The frost has taught you many things, that hunger humbles, that silence tolls louder than bells, that endurance is built not on strength alone but on persistence. The great frost will one day pass into memory, but its lessons will endure, written not only in graves and hunger, but in the resilience of those who lived through it. You close your eyes, the crackle of fire steady in your ears, and carry those lessons into the silence of the night. You walk through the village one final time, the frost softened now by the shy hand of spring. The snow has thinned, retreating into ditches and shaded corners, leaving behind fields dark with mud. Birds have returned, their calls hesitant but insistent, threading through the quiet like stitches in a torn cloth. Yet for all the signs of renewal, the memory of winter lingers, heavy as stone. The great frost is passing, but the memory of a white death will not fade. You see it in the houses that stand empty, their shutters closed, smoke no longer rising from their chimneys. Families once filled them with laughter, with song, with voices lifted in prayer. But the frost silenced them, leaving only silence in their stead. You see it in the barns, where empty stalls gape wide, their former tenants claimed by hunger or cold. You see it in the eyes of your neighbors, hollowed not only by famine but by the weight of what they have witnessed. Children buried, parents lost, graves pressed close together in the frozen ground. The memory of this winter is not only carved into soil and stone but into the very rhythm of life. Bread, is eaten differently now. Each crumb savored, each crust valued. Fires are tended with reverence, wood stacked carefully, no ember wasted. Voices in the square are quieter, tempered by caution, for everyone knows how quickly sound itself can be swallowed by frost. The memory of a white death shapes every gesture, every glance, reminding all that life is fragile and that nature does not bend to human need. You make your way to the churchyard, where the ground is soft again, heavy with the thaw. Rows of graves stretch outward, wooden markers leaning, names fading. Some are nameless still, their occupants remembered only by those who buried them. The thaw has loosened the soil, and green shoots begin to press timidly upward among the mounds. Life insists on returning, but it does so beside the memory of those who could not endure. The silence here is not empty, it hums with presence, with voices too faint for ears but too heavy for hearts to ignore. At the river, ice drifts slowly downstream, breaking apart in jagged shards, carrying away the last strength of winter. Wagons no longer cross its frozen surface, but the memory remains, the creak of wheels, the crack of ice, the risk of each passage. The river runs free again, yet you remember when it stood silent, when it bore not water but hunger, carrying nothing but fear and need. Every drop of its current now seems like a prayer, a promise that movement will return, that stillness cannot hold forever. As night falls, you sit by the hearth, the fire burning steady at last. You listen to its crackle and feel warmth settle against your skin. But even here, in comfort, you remember. You remember the cries of offspring muffled under quilts too thin, the barns without sound, the funerals on frozen ground, the letters written in despair. You remember the tolling of silence, louder than bells, heavier than storms. The great frost has ended, but its mark will endure for generations, whispered at hearths, told in fields, carved into prayer. The memory of a white death is not simply sorrow, it is a lesson, a warning, and a testament. It reminds you that life persists not by abundance but by endurance, by the sharing of crusts, by the flicker of a candle in the window, by the stubborn refusal to let the frost claim everything. And so you sit, gazing into the flames, carrying the memory within you, knowing it will never melt away, even when the fields grow green again and the sky finally softens into blue.